Sunbeams pierced through the thick canopy of the forest. After a fierce battle, the main character was breathing heavily and looked completely exhausted. Deep in the forest, a group of warriors in blue armor surrounded a man sitting on a throne. Before them lay defeated fighters in yellow armor, and one of them, dying, let out a coarse curse. Behind the woman stood a man, while she sat with her hand covering her mouth, lost in thought and exhaustion. Narrowing her eyes, she gave a ruthless order for execution. A massive man in a mask raised his axe to strike, while his comrade with a spear prepared to cover the attack. The main character managed to dodge with great difficulty, and the pain was reflected on his face. Hearing a sudden sound, he turned sharply. Wearing a black cloak, he delivered a crushing blow, instantly knocking down two opponents, one of whom was wielding an axe. The warriors in the forest shouted Jae-hyun's name. He was intently preparing for battle, surrounded by mystical energy. He noticed a white-haired man swiftly draw his sword and rush forward. The warning about a joint attack came too late. The sword strikes had already fallen on the enemies, accompanied by bursts of power. The man in the cloak swung his blade, knocking down opponents one after another. With blood on his face, he realized that everything that had happened was the result of their decisions. 3 armored fighters watched him in heavy silence. With a knife in his hand, he couldn't understand why he felt guilty at all. Another warrior, leaning on his sword, remained calm and offered a helping hand. The woman in white still sat on the throne, hiding her face, and the tension before the decisive moment thickened. The main character challenged her will, and she responded with cold confidence. Off to the side, a white-haired man supported the wounded man while the other fighters surrounded them, waiting for the outcome. 3 warriors walked through the forest, discussing their joint actions. A woman, surrounded by light and gusts of wind, looked down with a slight smile, radiating calm and power. The exchange of glances and words between the opponents was filled with hidden threats. The main character glanced at the watch on his wrist, and it flashed with a bright blue light. Energy burst out, thickening the atmosphere. A ring of blue power flew off his hand, and the air trembled. In armor, sword in hand, he prepared for a new blow, surrounded by glowing particles. The woman clenched her fist, remembering the man she hated, and irritation distorted her face. The main character, laughing through the pain, showed contempt for death, even after receiving a serious wound. Blood ran down his face, and the warriors watching him felt the tension reach its limit. Warnings of a sharp decline in vitality and limited movement flashed like omens of imminent danger. He collapsed to the ground, trying to comprehend what was happening, while the enemy towered over him in the pouring rain. In the forest, 3 men stood back to back, realizing there was nowhere left to retreat. A woman's laughter echoed over the frightened enemy. She takes a step in her golden shoes and says that her interlocutor has become too carried away with his friendship. He lies on the ground and declares that he is going to take out another participant standing nearby. She smiles and says that even he will no longer be able to enter the system. He is breathing heavily, lying on the ground with his eyes wide open, as if after a desperate struggle. She sarcastically remarks that her interlocutor has become useless again. He digs his hand into the ground with force, leaving deep furrows. With a cry, he lunges forward, trying to grab the man in the blue uniform. The frame conveys the explosion of blood and the sound of the blow, emphasizing the brutal force of what is happening, without clearly visible characters. He falls with a knife in his back, and 2 men in fur coats look at him in the forest. He stands among the trees with his eyes closed, enjoying the silence and peace. With blood on his face and a wound in his side, he struggles to stay on his feet in front of his enemy. He desperately orders his opponent to finally die. Despite his obvious wounds and fatigue, he looks up with determination. An angry shout rings out against the backdrop of the pink sky and silhouettes of trees. He smiles tensely, while she looks down at him with a slight smirk. Death and danger warnings appear on the screen, heightening the tension. Numerous warning signs and symbols appear. With his eyes wide open, he feels the monstrous tension and the blows of scarlet waves of energy pulsating around his head. The main character was breathing heavily and laughing as he sat on the bed in the darkened room. His head was clasped in his hands, and inside him, intense internal tension and pain were growing. An image appeared of a logo with a golden dragon, and the inscription, Commander, against the backdrop of a mystical cave. A red dragon attacked 2 warriors in a fiery battle that was broadcast live. Then an image appeared, announcing that the game, based on artificial intelligence and virtual reality, was bringing in incredible amounts of money against a backdrop of flying banknotes. With blood on his face, the main character realized that he would not lose this game as long as he held the knife over his defeated opponent, while the other listened to him attentively. After that, a smile appeared and a hand was extended, symbolizing an offer of cooperation or friendship. In response, the stranger's clothes were squeezed, forgiveness was expressed, and then a decisive departure followed. Suddenly, 3 people were attacked in a narrow street. One of them retreated in fear, trying to defend himself. The main character's thoughts turned to Don Su, and the question of why it was necessary to bear this burden so that scoundrels could live well. The image of a red traffic light and a spinning car wheel appeared, creating a tense atmosphere. The main character was overcome with agonizing remorse because he did not know how it would end, and the pain became unbearable. He ran toward the glowing object, thinking that from the very beginning he had never cared about anyone else. The scene of the fall from a height was accompanied by the sounds of impact and screams. Then an abstract image of a powerful collision appeared against a background of red and black spots with no visible characters. An injured man lay on the road in a pool of blood next to an overturned car, and cries about the victim could be heard all around. The main character desperately wished death upon another person. In response, there was a frenzied excitement and tension, distorted by a crazy smile and wide-open eyes. The main character lay on the ground with blood on his face, his eyes reflecting pain and horror. A bright flash of light tore through the darkness, accompanied by the sound of breaking glass and a deafening noise. A welcome message for a user named Herkin appeared on the screen against a backdrop of a starry sky and glowing elements. The main character opened his eyes sharply, reacting to the loud noise around him. A minotaur appeared in the dark labyrinth. The main character looked down anxiously, realizing the seriousness of the situation. In the tense atmosphere, two men with swords prepared to attack the red-eyed creature in the darkness. The monster with burning red eyes let out a deafening roar, expressing rage and menace. Three men with firearms prepared for battle, realizing that they would have to act together amid the wounded bodies and traces of destruction. The main character felt mortal danger and determination. The space was filled with flashes of energy, blows, and explosions. The force of the collisions was felt in every movement, and blood splattered in the air. As a result of the decisive blow, the huge creature was defeated, and blood and debris flew around. After that, a tense calm descended among the survivors. The main character, with blood on his face, looked ahead with determination, preparing for the coming battle. He extended his hand as a sign of possible cooperation or alliance. In another scene, the main character stood in blood with burning eyes expressing anger and determination. A message appeared about the return of the killer of heroes named Herkin. Then he took off his helmet. In a huge hall, many people were examining capsules, and one man in a helmet was coming out of one of them. The main character recalled that 5 years ago, he was left without money, and reflected on how he lived at that time. In a dark room, there was a technological helmet with a cable connected to it, hanging down. The main character suddenly broke away from the crowd and rushed forward at a fast pace. In his mind, he was clearly aware that he had the knowledge and experience of the future for the next 5 years. Surprise arose, and panic appeared in response to his internal decision. The main character hurriedly handed over his bank card, expressing urgency and tension. His breathing was heavy, his body bent, and those around him noticed this state. After that, agreement followed. The main character smiled restrainedly and continued to breathe heavily, clearly in a state of stress or severe fatigue. They showed him the card and explained something with a smile, and he listened attentively. His expression became stunned as he did not expect such a turn of events. He began to speak tensely, but stopped abruptly due to a sharp sound expressing alarm or irritation. The main character lowered his head onto the table and realized that if he had money, he would have bought everything long ago while the girl was watching him. He was overcome with panic about what to do next. He thought about ways to earn money, but doubted that he could do it. The main character's gaze was fixed ahead, filled with horror and shock, as if he had realized something truly terrible. He looked at the image of the woman and heard the thought that hesitation was a luxury that was unacceptable in battle. On the display, the image of the Storm Queen in the series addressed everyone, calling on them to become true masters of war. In the finale, the main character remained standing in front of the huge screen, on which the inscription about the beginning of the path of a military leader shone brightly. Lost in thought, the main character thought about his current situation and what his next step should be. At that moment, the mocking face of one person and his scathing words came back to his mind. The thought that he had once again become useless and worthless hit him hard. A firm determination appeared in the protagonist's gaze. He realized that he could no longer wait. He clearly understood that hesitation was no longer an acceptable luxury, and that the time for action had come. As the sun began to set, the scene changed. The main character found himself in his small, simple apartment. A new virtual gaming complex had already been delivered and installed in his room. The technician announced that the installation was complete and left immediately. The main character replied briefly and curtly. He stood there, thoughtfully looking at the card in his hand. It dawned on him that this was the fastest way to make money. The card turned out to be an advertisement for a quick and easy loan service. Some time ago, the main character sat across from a man and asked him for a loan of 10 million won. The man casually indicated that this was not a problem. However, his tone then changed abruptly. He threw the card forcefully on the table and stabbed it with a knife. His gaze conveyed a clear warning that if the money was not repaid, the protagonist's life would become hell. The protagonist was afraid, but said nothing. The risk was enormous, but he still took the card. Internally, he decided not to worry about the consequences. After that, the main character slowly began to put on the virtual reality helmet. In his mind, he was ready to descend even into hell for revenge. One by one, the faces of all those who had ever betrayed him appeared before his eyes. His eyes were filled with anger and burning fire. The connection process was activated. The system quickly recognized the user and confirmed successful login. The main character found himself back in the world of military leaders in the form of his character. He stood silently, as if waiting for someone specific to appear, trying to remember a name. At that moment, a radiant girl appeared before him. Golden energy swirled around her, and the light reflected off her blonde hair. She introduced herself and identified herself as his guide. The main character recognized her instantly, and his expression changed. The girl held out her hand and began to explain the basic rules of the world. It was explained that it was necessary to choose one of 3 starting classes, and the skills chosen at this stage would determine the further direction of specialization. The moment of decision had come. It was not just a choice of class, but the first step in his entire story. The first class presented was that of a warrior who fights on the front lines using melee weapons. The main character thought about this option for a while. He already had experience that would allow him to develop quickly, but he rejected this path, realizing that in the future, solo advancement with such a class would be extremely difficult. Then the cleric class was described, which plays a supporting role, healing and helping others. The main character rejected this option without hesitation, clearly realizing that he had no intention of saving or supporting anyone. In the end, there was only one possible path left. The girl smiled slightly and activated the chosen option. Golden magical energy began to emanate from her hands, surrounding the main character on all sides. Surprise was reflected on his face. Then a system message appeared in front of him stating that the base class had been selected, and that he was being sent to the corresponding tower. The scene changed, and the main character found himself in a mysterious tower. A powerful, booming voice rang out inside, welcoming the young seeker of knowledge. This voice belonged to the mentor who taught representatives of the magical class. The main character was asked what kind of magic he wanted to study. He answered without hesitation, choosing dark magic. The mentor was stunned for a moment and did not immediately believe what he heard. He suggested that the protagonist might have meant earth magic, but the protagonist confirmed his choice with the same determination. The mentor's expression changed, and concern was clearly visible on his face. He warned of the extreme danger of dark magic, and that it could even destroy the soul. However, the main character remained coldly clear-headed. He was aware of the risk, and understood that he had chosen this path consciously. The mentor trembled visibly, realizing the seriousness of the choice he had made. This bold choice shook the mentor so much that his appearance began to change. His form distorted, turning into a frightening shadow figure, almost skeletal. Then came the mocking realization that too much time had passed since anyone had dared to choose this path. A book of skills suddenly appeared before the main character. It was clearly stated that if he was truly ready, he should touch the book, remembering that the path he had chosen would not be easy. The main character's eyes burned with determination. He was no longer going to back down. Without wasting a moment, he ignored the warnings and placed his hand on the skill book. This path was not originally intended for the reckless, but for those who were clearly aware of their actions. A confident smile appeared on the protagonist's face. His calmness and courage made a strong impression. It was obvious that such people were extremely rare. At that moment, a famous video from his past life popped into the main character's mind. In it, one player used necromancy, the art of summoning the dead. Alone, without any support, that player managed to defeat an extremely powerful boss. A crystal-clear thought formed in the main character's mind that he needed exactly that kind of power. At that moment, a system notification appeared. The main character officially became a necromancer. The title of Novice Necromancer and a skill called Skeleton Shard were unlocked. A confident smile reappeared on his face. He mentally repeated the name of his new skill and activated it. A skull began to form from the energy in his palm. When it was thrown down, white magical energy slowly took the form of a skeletal warrior. At the same time, a notification appeared stating that mana was required to fully form the skeletal warrior. The main character silently watched the creation process and confirmed his decision that this time, he would become a necromancer at any cost. As soon as the skeleton was fully formed, the main character's transformation into a true necromancer was complete. He was ready. The desire to immediately begin development arose in his mind. However, looking at his new summoned creature, the main character noticed something strange. The skeleton was holding its own skull and tossing it like a ball. For a few seconds, the main character stood in a daze. not understanding why the skeleton was behaving this way. Without wasting any time, he entered the glowing portal and found himself in a training dungeon for beginners. Once there, his doubts only grew stronger. The skeleton's behavior was clearly different from what he remembered. He wondered if the reason might be its low skill level. The main character immediately opened the skills window and began to study the skeleton's characteristics. From what he read, it became clear that the strange behavior was indeed due to an insufficient level. He quickly realized that he needed to level up as soon as possible. At that moment, a loud rumble rolled through the dungeon. Creatures appeared before him, ice wolves. They weren't overly strong, but their speed made them a worthy challenge for the skeleton. The main character focused his gaze on the wolves and without hesitation used the skeleton shard skill on his enemies. Magical energy rapidly formed, and the skeleton fully materialized again. Now he was ready for battle. Sensing the presence of its opponents, the skeleton automatically assumed a fighting stance. The wolves cautiously but inexorably began to approach. A confident smile appeared on the main character's face. The skeleton immediately rushed forward and unleashed a powerful attack on the wolves. The main character was genuinely surprised. The effectiveness was even higher than expected. He became convinced that at this rate, he would be able to quickly reach the highest levels. However, this surprise was soon replaced by shock. Suddenly, the skeleton's bones scattered in all directions. The main character froze, not believing his eyes. He did not understand what had happened. The skeleton collapsed to the ground, and the whole scene looked as if sadness itself had been turned into a mockery. The main character was overcome with confusion. He hastily opened the skills window, trying to find the cause of the error. Studying the description, he understood the source of the problem. The skeleton's combat mode was not set. The skill had a built-in artificial intelligence system that learned from combat experience and had 3 modes: defensive, offensive, and special. It was all about the modes. The main character grabbed his forehead, realizing his mistake and understanding that he had overlooked the most basic thing. After that, the defensive mode was activated. A bright light suddenly flashed in the skeleton's eyes. However, what followed was even more disappointing. The wolves began to drag the skeleton across the ground, tearing it apart like a toy. There was virtually no resistance. The main character froze in shock again. It was defense mode, but the situation was becoming increasingly desperate. In fear, he activated the third option, special mode. There was still hope that now everything would change. But it turned out to be a complete disaster. The skeleton suddenly began to dance, performing ridiculous movements. The realization that the situation was completely out of control led the main character to despair. His eyes filled with tears, and he blamed himself entirely. Everything was ruined. He collapsed to the ground, completely broken. His thoughts were confused. His consciousness was on the verge of collapse. In desperation, he tried to delete the character, but the system issued a notification that characters that had existed for less than 3 months could not be deleted. Now the protagonist was truly trapped. All he could see before his inner eye was complete humiliation. Sitting on the ground, immersed in despair, he realized that it was impossible to even change his chosen class. At that moment, he remembered that his loan payments would begin the following month. The bitter thought of his own misfortune only intensified his sense of hopelessness. Everything had just started to fall into place, but now it was falling apart again. He glanced at the useless skeleton, which had not helped him in any way so far. This only increased his irritation. In a fit of rage, he began to scold the summoned creature, demanding that it not move and stand still. It was then that the image of an experienced necromancer from his past life came to mind. The question arose as to how that man managed to control such clumsy skeletons. Suddenly, an idea popped into his head. The main character immediately reopened the skill description window and noticed an extremely important detail that he had previously overlooked. The summoned creatures possessed a deep learning system and gained experience directly in battle. At that moment, true understanding came. The skeleton watched the battle with the ice wolves and learned from it. The main character approached the skeleton and stood next to it, aware of his superiority. The skeleton looked at him with slight confusion. The main character's memory flashed back to the past, when he was considered a genius for leading his entire team to the top. He clearly understood one of the main laws of combat. If you cannot dodge an attack, death will follow. After that, he suddenly struck the skeleton. It crashed to the ground with a bang, but the main character did not stop. Blow after blow followed one after another. He continued, forcing the skeleton to get up again and again, explaining the need for movement, evasion, and counterattack. Gradually, the skeleton began to change. It assumed a fighting stance, and a serious look appeared in its glowing eyes. A confident smile appeared on the main character's face. After a while, the ice wolves returned and attacked again. But now the skeleton immediately applied the knowledge it had gained. He deftly dodged the attacks and, at the right moment, delivered a powerful blow to one of the wolves. The skeleton continued to fight with impressive skill, while the main character watched the battle. Suddenly, the skeleton stopped and looked at him with an expression of deep gratitude. This was noticed, and attention to the battle was restored. The last move turned out to be quite good. The skill associated with the skeleton began to improve rapidly. As training and fighting continued, the progress became more and more noticeable. Soon, a system notification appeared about the player's level increase. This brought deep satisfaction and joy. After that, the main character headed to the village for beginners, located near Figus Castle, which was overflowing with novice players. Walking through the village, he reflected on how the skeleton was truly worth all the effort. He concluded that another 2 or 3 days of training would allow the skeleton to clear the training dungeons on its own. His mind was already turning to the next real challenge, taking the first step toward reaching level 10. At that moment, he heard someone calling out behind him. The main character turned around and saw a large man surrounded by his followers. The man was furious because he had not received an apology after the shoulder collision. The main character immediately realized that he was dealing with another group of street thugs, wasting his precious time. A serious thought began to form in his mind to finish them off right there and then. Just as one of the men was about to attack, someone else suddenly appeared. This person was dressed in strange clothes and easily intercepted the attacker's arm. His demeanor was calm, and a smile appeared on his face, expressing confidence and superiority. The large man flew into a rage, not understanding who had intervened and whose side he was on. However, the newcomer made it clear that he did not belong to either side. The main character immediately recognized this man. It was a legendary warrior from a past life, one of the most powerful players. His massive muscles and distinctive appearance left no doubt. The main character clearly remembered that in a past life, this man was a warrior of the highest class and was considered the strongest player of his time. The main character couldn't understand what such a legendary figure was doing in this place. He felt slightly confused and anxious. Meanwhile, the warrior who had intervened sarcastically condemned the attacker's behavior. They began to justify themselves, claiming that it was the main character who had confronted them first, and that an outsider should not have interfered. They even recalled the old saying about equal retribution. In response, the intervener only smiled. The next moment, he released a frightening fighting aura. Fear instantly reflected on the faces of the attackers. The large man froze, as if petrified. The main character watched the scene intently. The warrior calmly and with a slight sneer reminded them that his palm had been struck, which meant he had the right to respond. At that moment, one of the attacker's companions shouted, recognizing the identity of the intervener. He announced that they were standing before the leader of a guild ranked among the 30 strongest, a man known as a killer because of his obsession with battle. The attackers were completely shocked. They couldn't understand why such a figure would intervene over such a minor incident. The warrior slowly moved forward, and his anger became palpable. The attackers couldn't utter a word, and trembling with fear, ran away, looking back and apologizing. The warrior smiled, satisfied that everything had been resolved without a fight. Then he turned to the main character with a friendly expression, trying to make sure that he was all right, and that such people should not be taken seriously. However, the main character silently took a step back. This behavior surprised the warrior. The main character coldly made it clear that he no longer needed his help, then left without another word. The warrior smiled slightly, noting to himself the coldness of the main character's character. The main character walked away, feeling angry and frustrated. He keenly felt his own weakness against the backdrop of the power he had just witnessed. His hand was shaking. He honestly admitted to himself that he was afraid at that moment. But it was then that he made a firm promise to himself. The next time he met this warrior, he would be a completely different person. His eyes flashed with determination, and his face became extremely serious. The scene shifted back to the training dungeon. A faint fire flickered on the walls, and the main character sat alone, thinking about the difference in strength between himself and such powerful players. Another person, equally strong, came to mind, and it became clear that in order to get revenge, he would have to become much stronger than his current level. At that moment, a powerful beast resembling a tiger suddenly appeared and attacked swiftly. However, the skeleton companion of the main character instantly rushed forward and, using new skills, struck a blow. The skeleton fought aggressively and inflicted significant damage on the tiger. The battle ended fairly quickly, and a system notification appeared stating that the ice tiger had been defeated and the level had been raised. But even after this success, the main character did not feel joy. The path to the 10th level took 3 days, which exceeded his expectations. The skeleton, noticing its master's dissatisfaction, looked depressed. At that moment, a new message appeared. It announced that the 10th level had been reached, that there were no more monsters left in the dungeon, that the novice tag had been removed, and that the rewards would be transferred. After reading this, the main character finally felt joy. At that moment, a device appeared on his wrist, a combat watch. It had many functions, displaying status, tasks, maps, inventory, and serving as a means of communication. The main character felt satisfied, realizing that his journey was just beginning. It seemed unusual to him to use this device again after so long. He immediately requested to open the status window. The next moment, the status window appeared before him. Name, Gurkhan. Level, 10th. Class, Necromancer. Some of the characteristics had already been distributed earlier. 3 points were invested in strength and endurance, and 5 in intelligence and mana. Then a new message appeared asking him to distribute the remaining attribute points. The main character began to think seriously. This was the first time he had allocated points on his own. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Usually, it makes sense for a necromancer to invest in intelligence or mana. However, the main character confidently made an unexpected decision. He invested all his remaining points in strength. Immediately, a message appeared stating that his strength had increased by 50. After that, he looked at his hand, where another window opened. His total strength was now 53. The main character's face showed complete satisfaction. The choice he had made seemed perfect to him. However, the skeleton looked at him with surprise, clearly showing disappointment. It seemed as if the skeleton had decided that the main character had abandoned the path of a necromancer, since he had invested all his points in physical strength. This annoyed the main character. He lightly hit the skeleton on the head, letting him know that he was wrong. He had not given up on being a necromancer, and had no intention of doing so. On the contrary, he was helping his companion grow. At this stage, increasing mana or intelligence would not make a significant difference. However, increasing physical strength allowed him to teach the skeleton the combat techniques he had mastered in his previous life. The main character became serious. He made it clear that he was risking his own life for the sake of the skeleton's growth, and that it was now important to focus on training. Then he confidently added that the lack of characteristics could be compensated for in other ways. After that, the main character headed for the Adventurers Guild building in Figus Castle. There, newbies were crowded together, excitedly discussing tasks and arguing with each other about who would get which mission. The main character quickly realized that the tasks available at the moment were not very good. However, everyone was enthusiastic because they were all novice adventurers. He approached a guild employee to take on a task. The employee looked at him in surprise and warned him that the remaining tasks were quite difficult, and no one wanted to take them. The main character paused and carefully studied the list. The quests really did look boring and unattractive. But at that moment, a confident expression appeared on his face. He realized that this was the hidden map he had been looking for. The selected task was called the Cave of Mount Bima. The goal was to destroy all low-level monsters in the vicinity of Mount Bima. The reward was only 10 gold coins. The guild employee asked again if he was sure about choosing a quest with such a low reward. The main character was absolutely sure. He knew that if he completed this quest before reaching level 15, he would receive a rare title. Memories from the past told him that titles significantly enhanced a character's stats, and a promising title gave a percentage boost, making the owner extremely strong. With firm conviction, the main character decided that this was where his true path, the path of a legend, began. After that, he moved on to the next stage of his plan. He enthusiastically focused on preparing the necessary equipment. After some time, he arrived at Mount Bima, the location of the task. But when he saw his own shadow, he felt both shock and irritation. His equipment looked ridiculous and strange. The bright, tasteless clothes made him look like he had escaped from the circus. He felt ashamed of his ridiculous appearance. His inner irritation grew. He remembered that he simply did not have the money for normal clothes. Most of his funds had gone toward equipment for the skeleton, so he had to settle for cheap gear. The main character decided to complete the task as quickly as possible, so that he could afford normal clothes. With this thought in mind, he headed deep into the forest, intending to complete the mission quickly. As soon as he moved forward, a bloody hand appeared from the bushes. It reached out, as if in a last attempt to get help, and then fell limply to the ground. A wounded boy lay in the grass. His face was covered in blood, and his voice was barely audible. His faint plea for help dissolved into the silence of the forest. His trembling fingers remained on the ground as a symbol of unfulfilled hope. Several young men stood nearby. Their faces were frozen in a sinister expression, and they laughed as they looked at the condition of their victim. At the other end of the same forest, a young player shouted joyfully. He had finally reached Mount Bima. His name was Malti. He stood in shining armor and proudly enjoyed the moment. He had already reached level 11 and was confident that he could now get closer to the top rankers. However, his complacency was interrupted by a sudden cry nearby. He immediately ran in that direction and saw a man holding a seriously wounded friend in his arms and begging for help. The man explained that the creature that had attacked them was not like a normal monster at all. When Malti asked for more details, the man said in a trembling voice that they had only managed to escape by a miracle. but now they had no healing potions left, and the wounded man's condition was rapidly deteriorating. Malty tried to calm them down. As he had some potions himself, he immediately began rummaging through his bag. The gray-haired man was ready to repay this kindness in the future, with joy and tears of gratitude. But just as Malty glanced at his watch, he was suddenly struck from behind. He was knocked off his feet. He fell to the ground, choking on blood, breathing heavily, and with disbelief in his eyes. The two attackers laughed, considering him the perfect target because of his naivety and trustfulness. One of them noted that now they would be able to make good use of all his equipment. Malty tried to resist weakly, realizing that he had been deceived, but in response he heard only mockery. Their leader laughed loudly, calling the trap cheap and emphasizing that even Malty had managed to fall for it. After that, a system notification appeared about the death of the player Malty. This was followed by a message stating that his player watch had fallen to the ground as loot. The gang members gathered around and stared at the device with eager interest. One of them laughed, admitting that he never got tired of tricking newbies so easily. The leader, with a dangerous smile, suggested going in search of the next victim, displaying the sign of the Raff family guild, a notorious guild famous for its cruelty. Meanwhile, in another corner of the forest, the skeleton of the main character stood before two huge tree beasts. In the darkness they growled menacingly, resembling wolves made of wood, with frightening glowing red eyes. The main character raised his finger, activating combat mode. The skeleton's eyes immediately lit up bright blue, and he rushed at his enemies, cutting through the air. His sword cut one of them down with a cold gleam, and the second's claws were broken by the same blow and fell to the ground. The system screen was flooded with notifications about the skeleton warrior's victory over the ancient tree wolf. Hundreds of experience points were earned for this. The main character smiled slightly, noting to himself that he had done the right thing by equipping his companion in advance. Then he looked at his ridiculous clothes and noted that although his appearance was strange, it didn't matter as long as the job was getting done. The skeleton grabbed his head in response, as if ashamed of his master's appearance. The main character looked at him sternly and made it clear that it was time to stop this farce and prepare to move on, as it was necessary to quickly level up and clear this area. The skeleton raised his weapon and was about to move forward, when suddenly an arrow whistled through the air at tremendous speed and pierced him right in the head, causing him to freeze in place. The main character became alert and began to look around, trying to understand where the shot had come from. Soon, 3 men emerged from the forest. One of them apologized, explaining that from a distance they had mistaken them for monsters. They approached casually and began to calmly explain the situation. The main character outwardly accepted the apology calmly, but inside, he felt a sense of unease. He noticed that one of the men had the player's watch on his wrist, hidden under blood-stained clothing. There were also clear traces of blood on the second man's weapon. The main character immediately understood who he was dealing with and noted to himself the audacity of these people. Realizing that they were trying to deceive him, he suddenly smiled and pretended to be willing to forgive them if they gave him the mana potion. They feigned embarrassment and claimed they did not have such potions. Then they offered to help him level up faster, calling it a form of apology. The main character asked if they really intended to help. They responded with a confident agreement. At that moment, the roar of beasts echoed through the forest. One of the men smiled and noted that it was the perfect time to level up. They laid out their plan. They would weaken the monsters, and the main character would have to deliver the final blow to gain all the experience. The main character outwardly agreed, but his gaze remained fixed on the 2 men. Behind his back, they whispered quietly, as if confirming their sinister strategy to each other. After that, the massive warrior stepped forward and deliberately headed towards the wooden wolves. His mage partner cast a spell that increased the wolves' attacking power. Then he abruptly pushed one of the wolves toward the main character and pretended it was an accident. The main character was stunned when the wolf rushed straight at him at full speed. He instantly raised his hands, preparing to defend himself. The 3 standing at a distance watched with anticipation, confident that the main character would now scream and collapse to the ground. However, in the next moment, the main character and the skeleton worked together as a team and destroyed the wolf in just a few seconds. After the victory, the main character looked sternly at the skeleton, dissatisfied with his slow reaction. The skeleton responded with a slightly embarrassed pose, as if he himself realized that he needed to improve his reaction speed. The main character smiled confidently, gave the 3 a sign of approval, and made it clear that the experiment could continue. This completely threw them off balance. They hadn't expected such power. Now all 3 began to get nervous. Alarming questions arose in their minds about the main character's true level, and whether he was really a beginner. Then they came up with a new plan, to send a huge wave of monsters at once, which he would not be able to handle. While the main character was busy fighting, the warrior quietly approached from behind, waiting for the right moment to attack. He raised his heavy hammer high and was sure that the blow would reach its target. But at the decisive moment, the main character dodged with perfect accuracy. The blow missed, and the attacker froze in shock. His attack missed its target, and the main character counterattacked with lightning speed, swinging his sword under the enemy's massive body and tearing open his chest. Blood gushed out, and he staggered. The two remaining robbers were shocked by what they saw. One of them couldn't believe his eyes. Without wasting a second, the main character gave a command to the skeleton. The skeleton's eyes flashed bright blue. Then they both rushed forward at lightning speed and in just a few seconds were next to their enemies. One of the robbers panicked and tried to stop what was happening, but the main character completely ignored him. The main character and the skeleton simultaneously delivered a double blow. It was so powerful that both enemies flew into the air and, screaming in pain, crashed to the ground. Their bodies were swept away by a wave of blue energy, while the main character and the skeleton stood calmly in place. The main character slowly turned around, clearly aware of what such people are like, betraying trust, robbing, and deceiving. He approached one of the wounded and noted to himself that he might have fallen into such a trap before, but now it was impossible. The robber lying on the ground sobbed and begged for mercy, promising to give up everything he had. However, the main character, without the slightest compassion, delivered the final blow. Immediately after that, a system notification appeared about the death of the player Raf and the fall of items without honor. It became clear how many people these criminals had already killed. The main character smiled, deciding that in the current situation, the most reasonable step would be to use all the trophies to the maximum, starting with clothing. Meanwhile, the skeleton kicked the body of his massive opponent furiously, as if splashing out his accumulated anger. His bones were stained with blood, but the look he gave the main character was different. There was something new in it. The main character noticed this and turned his attention to the skeleton with concern, then approached it and healed it with blue magical light. The skeleton joyfully raised his sword. Now he was clad in new armor and stood like a true proud warrior. The main character laughed, noting how much the skeleton liked his new appearance. Then he became more serious, realizing that appearance is not decisive in the game and that true strength is hidden within. Despite this, the main character still allowed himself to show off a little in his new clothes. After that, he looked at the skeleton and noted that the player's watches were a real jackpot. He knew perfectly well that when such watches were sold from the inventory, an item would randomly drop. It could be rare armor, an ancient weapon, a cursed skill book, or even just money. The main character laughed involuntarily, realizing that luck was clearly on his side today. Then he raised his hand, showing off a special golden mask. Realizing that he had received it even earlier than expected, he had already managed to quickly complete the crafting. With firm determination, he came to the conclusion that he would now begin recording his gameplay, and to do so, he needed to create a strong and stable personal identity. He recognized that in order to move on to the next stage, it was extremely important to have a special and distinctive image. At that moment, memories from the past came to mind. He clearly saw a scene where he was sitting in front of one of the guild members and enthusiastically proposing his unique idea. At that time, the main character explained that if the entire guild wore the same masks, they would spread across the server like wildfire. After a moment's thought, his interlocutor agreed, and the main character happily announced the new name of the guild, Haha Mask. He looked at the mask in his hand and thought that he had originally wanted to create a completely different identity, but in the end, this path turned out to be the right one. Then the main character raised the mask in the air and filled it with glowing blue magical energy. His face expressed anger and determination, as he was confident that from now on, no one would be able to steal his work or his belongings. He was firmly aware that through this mask, he would prove the value of each of his decisions and his own significance. After that, the main character put on the mask, looked at the skeleton, and made it clear that it was time to move on. His gaze became completely serious. The scene changed. Now they found themselves in an old, ruined mountainous area resembling ancient ruins. In the center stood a massive gate. The main character and the skeleton went inside, and a message appeared on the screen about entering the underground cave of Mount Bhima. Inside the dungeon, the main character slowly moved along the stone walls, thinking that blue werewolves must have lived here, and that the battle promised to be difficult. However, his equipment had now been upgraded, and he was confident that he would complete the dungeon in just 10 minutes. Overcome with excitement, he rushed forward through the narrow passage, and the skeleton, fully prepared for battle, followed him. But a few hours later, the main character was lying on the ground, sprawled on his back and staring up. Suddenly, he jumped up, struck by the fact that not a single monster had appeared yet. He was overcome with irritation, as something seemed wrong. He understood that if the dungeon had already been cleared, the system would have issued a corresponding message. So either there was a malfunction, or something else was hiding. At that moment, his attention was drawn to a strange formation on the wall. It was a pulsating mass of purple energy that emitted a faint glow. He quickly moved closer and touched it, immediately sensing that it was something unusual. The energy suddenly began to expand rapidly, as if opening a new passage and drawing in the surrounding air. A notification appeared on the screen stating that an instant dungeon had been found and suggesting that he enter it. The main character knew that such dungeons appeared randomly inside ordinary ones, and when activated, the original dungeon was paused until the trial was completed. He also knew that they were much more difficult, but the rewards were commensurate with the level of risk. There was no middle ground here, either complete victory or death. At first, the main character thought it would be wiser to retreat, because if he died, he would be taken out of the game for 2 days, and during that time he could complete other tasks. However, in the next moment, his expression changed. He strode decisively toward the portal, completely focused on one goal: to complete this trial. With absolute determination, he stepped inside. A bright flash of blinding light enveloped him, forcing him to cover his eyes with his hand. When the glare faded, he saw that he was standing in the center of a huge arena, reminiscent of the ancient Roman Colosseum. The skeleton was nearby. The main character looked around and concluded that this might be an arena for a duel. He felt tense, wondering what kind of opponent would appear next. At that moment, the ground began to shake slowly. Soon, a giant creature resembling a werewolf and exuding fury entered the arena. It stared at the main character, and a name appeared above its head: Distorted Werewolf, but its level was not displayed. The main character took a step back, stunned that such a powerful monster could appear here. The beast instantly rushed to attack. The first blow was so powerful that a shockwave spread throughout the arena. The main character was thrown straight into the wall and fell, writhing in pain. Everything around him was covered in dust and smoke. The skeleton remained standing in place, momentarily stunned, but then planted his feet firmly on the ground and raised his sword, demonstrating his determination. With a mocking expression on his face, he came to the conclusion that what was happening was beginning to resemble an absurd comedy. He understood that distorted monsters were usually associated with main quests, which meant he had unexpectedly gotten lucky. He looked at the skeleton, signaling that it was time to prepare for battle. Then, with a confident smile, the main character rushed straight towards the monster, while the skeleton remained nearby, fully prepared to join the fight. He continued to stand. Then the skeleton raised its sword in a coordinated manner, and the main character used it as a support, pushing off sharply and soaring into the air. He rose rapidly, and the distorted werewolf raised its head, freezing for a moment, as if examining particularly desirable prey. At that moment, the main character summoned dark purple energy within himself and, merging it with his weapon, activated the skill, Devil's Curse. As soon as the skill was activated, the dark energy bound the werewolf, and surprise was clearly reflected in its eyes. The protagonist's attack hit its target, causing the beast to stagger back, screaming in pain, and one of its arms was severed and fell to the ground. A message appeared on the screen indicating that the Devil's Curse skill had been activated, reducing the enemy's stats by 10%. The main character smiled slightly as he assessed the damage, realizing that even on his first attempt, the result was quite significant. However, the monster did not stop and went on the attack again. The next blow was incredibly fast, and the main character was already preparing to take the hit when a new notification suddenly appeared. The distorted werewolf entered a berserk state, causing all effects imposed on it to be removed. The main character realized with irony that the instant dungeon was not an easy test at all. At that moment, he decided to use a special skill that he had been saving. He raised his hand and activated the slot by pressing the device attached to his wrist. Suddenly, a powerful explosion of bright blue energy burst from his body, spreading out in all directions and forming an energy spiral around him. The ground began to shake and then, with a loud bang, light filled the entire arena. When the glow faded, the main character appeared in a new set of armor, surrounded by dark energy, completely ready for real combat. This was his special skill, Slot On, a unique ability in the game that provided a temporary boost by drawing energy directly from the game world. This skill transformed the player into an enhanced form, in which their strength increased many times over. Each player's form was unique in appearance, strength, and abilities, so it was given a common name, Final Mode. The main character stood in his final mode, surrounded by a blue energy aura. Opposite him, the distorted werewolf let out a deafening roar, baring its huge fangs and radiating pure primal rage. Then the beast lunged forward at incredible speed, making a sideways dash with its claws raised for a devastating attack. The main character managed to dodge, but a series of rapid blows followed. He skillfully avoided them, although one of the swings came so close that it almost hit him. Seizing the moment, the main character jumped back, and in the next instant, a new blow struck the spot he had just vacated, which he barely managed to dodge. Now he clearly understood that this was no ordinary monster. Its speed and brute strength made it a deadly threat. The main character realized that if the beast landed just 4 accurate blows, the outcome of the battle could be decided in its favor. When the werewolf lunged again, the main character smiled slightly, realizing that he had another plan. In the next moment, he released a powerful blue energy wave from his sword, which struck the beast directly. It let out a cry and staggered backward, while the protagonist remained standing in place, fully prepared to continue. However, in the next moment, his expression changed dramatically because the monster activated its skill and shook the ground beneath his feet. Then the main character remembered that it was in a berserk state, that the creature's strength increased many times over, which he had forgotten for a moment. Falling through the air, he noticed that the werewolf was already directly below him, its eyes glowing red, ready to deliver a fatal blow. At that moment, the skeleton stood between them. Without fear, it raised its sword and delivered a powerful blow that severed another of the beast's arms. This gave the main character a chance to regain his balance. He signaled to the skeleton to perform the move they had practiced together. The werewolf froze in amazement when he saw both of them rush at him with incredible speed. Before it could react, the main character and the skeleton launched a coordinated attack directly at its body. The force of this double blow was so great that the beast's body began to tear apart from within and crumbled into small fragments without any resistance. The next moment, a message appeared on the screen announcing the defeat of the distorted monster. The distorted werewolf was defeated, and immediately after that, the effect of the slot-on skill ceased. After his victory, the main character allowed himself a barely noticeable smile, realizing that the result was not yet final. A quest card appeared in front of him with a note about the completion of the mission, the reward for which was 10 gold coins. Immediately after that, new notifications began to arrive. It was reported that the skeleton had defeated a powerful monster, as a result of which its skill had increased to rank E. It also indicated that the total earnings amounted to 20,865 gold coins, and that a werewolf skull and a belt had been obtained as loot. After reading this, the main character felt genuine joy, realizing that the rewards were extremely valuable. Suddenly, another system message appeared, stating that he had received a rare necklace called the Necklace of the Distorted Tracker. This item was a unique chronicle type and provided an 18-point boost to all characteristics related to the classification. Seeing this, the main character froze in amazement for a moment, realizing that he was looking at an extremely high-ranking item which, despite being non-tradable, surpassed standard unique items. His attention lingered on the name of the necklace, and at that moment, a suspicion related to the main quest chain came to mind. Almost immediately, 3 glowing windows appeared in front of him, informing him that 3 new titles had been registered on his account. The first title was Promising Newcomer, which gave a 3% boost to intelligence and magic, which was completely in line with his current goals. The second was the title Challenger of Heroes, which increased stamina by 3 points, logically reflecting the fact that the instant dungeon had been completed alone. However, the third title made the strongest impression on the main character. It was called The Distorted Pathfinder, something he had not expected to see at all. He immediately remembered that this title was part of the first chapter of the main storyline called The Count of Distortion. At that moment, everything that was happening took on a much deeper meaning. The main storyline of Vovoda was the foundation of the entire game world. It featured key characters and major bosses, and the rewards for completing it were so exclusive that every player dreamed of becoming part of this journey. The main character remembered his past life, in which he had barely managed to reach the 4th chapter. Now he realized that he had gained access to this stage incredibly early, and understood that it could not be a mere coincidence. Overcome with mixed feelings, he initiated the process of exiting the game, still in disbelief at how much he had managed to achieve in a single day. In the next scene, he was already in the real world. The news was broadcasting an urgent report that the Hydra Guild had officially entered the final chapter of the Count of Distortion quest, and planned to complete it within 3 months. The main character sat silently in front of the screen, holding a mug in his hands, with an expression of deep thought on his face. His mood quickly changed to irritation and disappointment when he realized that someone had already reached the final chapter of the quest. He regretted that if he joined this chain now, there might be no significant achievements left for him. For a while, he thought about stopping and preparing for the next chapter. However, after a short pause, determination appeared in his eyes. He realized that at that moment, all the attention of the gaming world was focused on this task, the first major quest of the game, which was already nearing completion. At that moment, he realized that publishing a video related to this quest could attract a lot of attention and go viral. It was the perfect marketing opportunity. Images of countless views, success, and influence flashed through his mind. as if he were sitting on a throne, surrounded by wealth and recognition. He remembered that he had recorded the entire gameplay, and now all that remained was to quickly edit the material and upload it to a video platform. The protagonist clearly understood that editing was the key to success, and that it was impossible to entrust it to just anyone. It required a true professional, someone capable of turning the video into something extraordinary. So, he decided to contact the very person who, in his past life, was called the god of editing. He was sure that this was the only right choice. The scene changed to show a girl with pink hair and glasses eating noodles while looking at something on her phone. Her name was Ramani, an editor. At that moment, a notification popped up on her device, with a request to edit a video about completing a dungeon. The sender was a character named Harkin, who was only at level 15. At first, Ramani laughed it off, thinking it was a recording from a newbie who probably just wanted to show off on the internet. However, a moment later, her expression changed dramatically. She jumped up from her seat, overcome with intense shock, as if she had seen something truly extraordinary. She leaned closer to the screen. Her eyes were filled with intense concentration, and at that moment, she realized that she had found her goal. Romani, known by the pseudonym Hell's Mouth, was a freelance video editor. Holding her phone in her hands, she looked at the screen with sincere admiration and joy. A feeling of inspiration flared up inside her, one she hadn't felt in a long time. At the same time, in a completely different place, a woman stood at the window of her luxurious apartment and looked out at the city. She held a tablet in her hands, her face completely calm. Suddenly, an employee rushed into the room. The woman announced that a new video related to the Count of Distortion quest had just been uploaded. She pointed out that this video stood out from the rest, as it showed a level 15 player single-handedly defeating a distorted werewolf, something that had never happened before. The employee was amazed by what he heard. A short time later, he reported that the team had reviewed the recording and confirmed that the player's level was indeed extremely low. That was why the video had not been given much importance. Nevertheless, he admitted that he personally found the video very interesting. The woman smiled confidently and decided that she needed this player immediately. An order was given to bring him in as soon as possible. At that moment, her real name was revealed. Her name was Siri, one of the most influential figures in the financial world and the true heir to the giant corporation Thunder Group. However, in the world of Warlord, she was known by another name, Siri, Queen of Thunder. Jane couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the post he had published just yesterday. The number of views was significantly higher than expected, and exceeded 6,000 in just a few hours. This figure literally left him speechless, especially against the backdrop of memories of his past life, where achieving such a result took months of continuous work, regular uploads, and endless hours of preparation. Now, the same result came almost effortlessly, so quickly that it seemed unreal. As Jane carefully reread the post, his attention was drawn to a new element, a private message. It was sent by Romney. He recognized the name instantly. Romney was considered a quiet and reserved person who rarely took the initiative in communication. Even in her past life, she always kept to herself and hardly ever interacted with others. The fact that she was the first to write to him made Jane feel slightly uncomfortable and wary. However, he was even more surprised by the content of the message. It was not a random comment or formal praise. Romney was genuinely interested in when the next video would be released. At that moment, Jane suddenly realized that he had no plan for the future. He simply did not expect such a rapid increase in attention, and therefore had not even thought about future content. His mind began to work at double speed. He understood that it would be extremely difficult to find another rare opponent like a corrupt werewolf. It was this monster that became the key element of the first video and ensured high viewer interest. However, over time, a new idea began to form in Jane's mind. He decided to take a more thorough approach and prepare something new and truly exciting. At the same time, elsewhere, a high-ranking player named Metador Jeff was completely immersed in watching Jane's video. He watched the recording over and over again, each time paying attention to the smoothness of the movements and the exceptional precision of the actions. There was something hypnotic about Jane's fighting style. Every movement looked precise and perfectly calculated. Metador's gaze returned to the screen again and again, and the video never seemed boring to him. Over time, his attention focused on Jane's face. There was something familiar about it, although he couldn't remember the source of this feeling. This vague recognition bothered him, as if a forgotten detail should come to mind. Feeling slightly uneasy, Metador decided to share the video with Yell, who was just approaching him. She watched the recording, but her interest was much less pronounced. She reacted calmly to his concerns, suggesting that he had simply watched the video too many times, which was why Jane's face seemed familiar. Metador thought about this explanation for a moment, but it didn't really satisfy him. His attention returned to Jane's movements. Even as a novice, he showed no hesitation or awkwardness. Every action was as confident and fluid as that of an experienced fighter. It was impossible not to be impressed. Gradually, Metador began to feel that Jane was on a completely different level. In his mind, he began to compare him to elite fighters and martial arts masters, coming to the conclusion that he was perhaps a true genius. The thought of fighting such an opponent seemed extremely appealing to him. He wanted to test his own skills against someone truly outstanding, although he didn't know if Jane would accept such a challenge. While he was pondering this, Yale brought him back to reality, reminding him that the live broadcast was about to begin. Only now did Metador realize that a live performance was scheduled for today. When he was told that more than 200,000 viewers had purchased tickets for the broadcast, he instantly became serious. He was determined to give it his all to meet the audience's expectations. The broadcast began, and immediately after the start, the airwaves were filled with deafening cheers from fans. Metador stood in front of the entrance to the dungeon, waiting for the moment he had been preparing for a long time. When the gate in front of him materialized, he was completely ready to step inside. Meanwhile, Jane was already at the guild office in Figus Castle, hoping to receive a new assignment. However, the staff informed him that there were no quests available at the moment. He had expected to see at least a few available tasks, so this news upset him considerably. He sat at the table for a while, wondering if he would have to temporarily suspend the creation of the video. At that moment, a familiar face caught his attention. Houghton came up to him and immediately recognized the adventurer who had previously managed to clear the dungeon on Mount Bhima. Hearing his name, Jane looked up and immediately realized that it was Houghton standing in front of him. It was the same man who had given him the assignment earlier. Houghton came closer and introduced himself, then asked if Jane could spare him a few minutes. Receiving his consent, he began to explain that he had received information about a strange mutant spotted inside the cave on Mount Bhima. Jane felt slightly confused, as he couldn't remember a single assignment that mentioned mutants. However, he remembered an episode with a werewolf he had encountered deep in the cave, whose eyes looked unnatural and caused alarm. Houghton listened to the story with rapt attention, and accepted his words as truth without the slightest doubt. After deep thought, he came to the conclusion that the creature Jane had encountered could have been under the influence of a dark force associated with the so-called Defilers. Jane himself had never encountered such a concept before, and therefore did not fully understand what was being discussed. Houghton explained that even the Raiders Association did not yet have complete information about the nature of these defiled creatures. Only one thing was known: the anomalous energy emanating from them caused many monsters to suddenly lose control, fall into a rage, and become extremely dangerous. He was convinced that this dark force was at the root of the chaos spreading throughout the region, and therefore warned that many may have already fallen victim to its influence without even realizing it. In response to the increased threat, the Raiders Association announced a reward for the destruction of such creatures, hoping that a brave adventurer would be found who was willing to take the risk and try to stop the spread of evil. Without waiting for the explanation to end, Jane stood up, his eyes clearly showing his determination. He expressed his willingness to help, perceiving everything that was happening as a secret mission that must be accomplished regardless of the danger. Houghton thought that such a task might be too risky for Jane at this stage, but the strength of his intentions was obvious. Realizing that there would be no turning back, he finally agreed, deciding to evaluate his actions based on the results. He then mentioned a man named Ahemry, who lived in Bansu Castle, the eastern counterpart of Figus Castle. According to him, Ahemry could be the mentor who would prepare Jane for the real dangers. Moreover, he wrote a letter of recommendation to be delivered to this mage. In exchange, Ahemry was to hand over a rare book of skills that could significantly accelerate growth and learning. When the letter ended up in Jane's hands, a wave of joy swept through him. His heart beat faster, and without wasting a moment, he left the building. The realization of the opportunity that had opened up filled him with excitement and elation. The thought that he could become Ahemry's apprentice seemed almost unreal. Ahemry was no ordinary mentor. He was one of the 7 apprentices of the great magician Boken, and was highly respected in the world of magic. In addition, he was famous for possessing rare and incredibly powerful skill books. Meeting him was the dream of almost every magician. Jane understood that studying under such a master would not only be an honor, but also the possible beginning of a completely new stage in his journey. It opened up prospects that he could only dream of before, including unique content and opportunities for future recordings. However, as he was heading towards Bansu Castle, Jane suddenly remembered an important detail. He abruptly changed direction and headed for a secluded place where nothing would disturb his concentration. Once away from prying eyes, he activated a skeleton fragment skill that he hadn't tested since his last major battle. Among the rewards he had received was a special effect obtained from a werewolf with unnatural eyes. Now was the time to use it. The skill was applied to the skeleton, and the system immediately notified him that the skeleton warrior had gained a special trait related to the werewolf's endurance, significantly increasing its combat and defense stats. Then Jane took the defiled tracker's necklace out of his inventory. He had previously planned to give it to another creature, but now he decided to use it himself. After putting it on, his strength, agility, and class-related attributes increased noticeably, giving him confidence. He did not stop there. Reactivating the skeleton fragment, Jane created 2 identical copies of the warrior. The original skeleton looked confused, but each of them was given clear instructions to act only as a team and avoid internal conflicts. Satisfied with the result, Jane was about to continue on his way, but curiosity got the better of him. He decided to check what monsters lived nearby. His old skeleton was not enthusiastic about the idea. After walking some distance through the dense forest, Jane was suddenly attacked by a forest bear of about level 25. Its massive body rushed straight at him at tremendous speed. Jane managed to dodge at the last moment with great difficulty, but his relief was short-lived. The bear was becoming more and more aggressive, its fury growing with every passing second. Realizing that the situation was quickly spiraling out of control, Jane immediately signaled one of the skeletons to counterattack. Receiving the command, the skeleton quickly lunged forward. Its speed was not bad, but the forest bear reacted instantly. With a powerful swipe of its claws, it pinned the skeleton to the ground, after which it flew to the side and crumbled into a pile of broken bones. This sight only increased Jane's irritation. He expected a much more thoughtful action from the skeleton and mentally reproached him for his straightforward and overly obvious attack. The instructions were clear: to approach from the blind spot, not to rush head-on. Without wasting any time, Jane gave the command to the second skeleton. It also rushed at the bear, but the result was exactly the same. The beast delivered another swift and crushing blow, sending the summon to the ground next to the first one. Jane's irritation reached a new level. Despite extremely clear instructions, the second skeleton did not learn from the first one's mistake. The third skeleton stepped forward next. His behavior clearly conveyed confidence, as if he was certain he would perform better than the others. For a moment, Jane felt a glimmer of hope, but it quickly faded. The skeleton jumped up and tried to attack, but the bear knocked it down with the same ease, repeating his previous actions almost unchanged. After a short time, all 3 skeletons were kneeling in front of Jane. Each held its own skull in its hands, as if admitting guilt. Jane sighed deeply and gestured for them to return the skulls to their places. He spent some time trying to explain the principle of combat as simply as possible. Any monster instinctively turns toward the attack, so a frontal attack is the worst possible option. The only correct approach is to strike from a blind spot, where the enemy cannot see you approaching. However, it was obvious that the explanation was not fully understood. It was at this moment that Jane remembered the effect of the distorted tracker's necklace, which had increased his skill rank and allowed him to summon 3 skeletons at once instead of 1. It felt like a small but still significant step forward. At the same time, he was well aware that there were still too many gaps ahead. A new problem became apparent almost immediately. The 3 skeletons did not work as a team. Despite the knowledge being transferred, they lacked understanding of interaction and coordination. In addition, maintaining 3 summons at the same time required 3 times more mana, and the effectiveness remained extremely low, even worse than that of the original skeleton. This conclusion slightly disappointed Jane, but he still noted a small success. He reached level 20, as he had planned earlier. Upon reaching this milestone, he briefly considered taking a break from combat content, but quickly dismissed the idea. Now was not the time to rest. He ordered the skeletons to get up and continue training until they arrived at Pangsu Castle. Initially, Jane had hoped to leave all the combat work to his minions, and lead the quiet life of a necromancer that many members of this class dream of. However, reality turned out to be completely different. At least for now, he had to be on the front lines himself. At the same time, chaos reigned in Bansu Castle, inside the Raiders Association office. The building was overflowing with players, each eagerly awaiting a new assignment. When a lone player entered the main hall, the crowd instantly surrounded him, eager to find out what quest he had received. The atmosphere was tense and almost hysterical, as if everyone was desperately fighting for the last available quests. Jane stood aside and silently watched the proceedings. To his eyes, the raiders resembled hungry hyenas pouncing on carrion, greedy and shameless. He found their behavior pathetic, especially since many of them preferred to rely on others rather than make their own efforts. Ignoring the whole charade, Jane calmly headed for the stairs. As he began to climb, one of the players tried to strike up a conversation, but was instantly and coldly rebuffed. Jane understood that he had to hide his true intentions, especially regarding a Hemri's assignment. It was a covert mission, and any leak of information would inevitably lead to interference from others. To avoid unnecessary attention, he took out a sealed letter on the go and handed it to the employee on duty. indicating that it was a letter of recommendation from Houghton. The employee quickly glanced at the contents and, without asking any questions, directed him to the second floor. The employee shows him the way, and Jane moves forward without hesitation. Behind him, the other players begin to push the staff, trying to break through and demanding to be included in his group. The employee immediately intervenes and stops the crowd, while Jane calmly heads for the designated room. On the way, his thoughts are completely focused on the possible rewards of the hidden task. He wonders whether Ahemry, who is supposed to be his mentor, really has any valuable knowledge or items. He also hopes to build a strong relationship with him, which could develop into an alliance with a truly powerful character in the future. However, the moment the office door opens, Jane freezes in place. The room looks completely destroyed. Books, scrolls, documents, and strange magical items are scattered everywhere. Dust hangs in the air, and the only sign of life is a figure lying behind a mountain of books. Ahemry is fast asleep, crushed by his own research. The sound of the door wakes him. He raises his head, still disoriented. Jane calmly introduces her gamertag and hands over the letter of recommendation she received from Houghton. Ahemry lazily takes the letter, glances through it, and raises an eyebrow with slight interest. There is no severity or particular attention in his reaction, only a superficial assessment. In response, Jane remains reserved and does not draw unnecessary attention to himself. His true interest is focused solely on the reward. After a short time, Ahemry hands over the promised reward, and at that moment, a system notification pops up before Jane's eyes. He freezes, his gaze fixed on the interface. The system reports the receipt of 2 skill books, bone armor and a helmet of madness. Both items emit a faint glow, clearly indicating their rarity and high value. Jane remains motionless, not quite believing what is happening. He did not expect the hidden task to bring such serious rewards, and without any particular difficulties. While he is still in a state of disbelief, the system confirms the completion of the training mission at Ahemry. Everything is happening too fast. Jane was expecting a long chain of tasks, or at least continued interaction, but instead, he is almost immediately escorted out of the room. When he tries to linger, the books in the room start moving on their own, slowly blocking his path and directing him toward the exit. In a desperate attempt to change the situation, he is willing to do anything, hoping that it will influence Ahemry's decision and give him another chance. At the last moment, Ahemry stops him, grabbing his arm firmly. A strange smile appears on his face, half playful, half alarming. At that moment, the system interface reactivates and announces a new task. The new task requires retrieving an egg from a nest. The description is extremely brief, and most importantly, it explicitly states that there is no reward. Jane instantly realizes that he has been used. Ahemry deliberately played on his impatience and dragged him into another job without revealing any risks or details. Meanwhile, a heavily armored player appears at the Raiders Association building. His armor covers his body from head to toe, and his footsteps on the city streets sound dull and heavy. His presence is so overwhelming that passers-by involuntarily pay attention to him. Stopping in front of the building, he makes sure that this is the place where the masked man was seen earlier. He stood in heavy armor in front of a closed door in a dark room. A green light could be seen through his metal mask. The sunset sky behind him was slowly darkening. He stood still and waited. The door began to open, and the sound echoed throughout the room. He knew that expressing emotions could be a trap. Even a regular NPC could deceive if it played on surprise or disappointment. That's why he didn't react right away. He still wondered why, instead of the main mission, he had been given a task related to the egg. It didn't seem important and didn't match the level of threat. Under his hood, his face looked tired. He spoke slowly, his voice hoarse. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. He asked about the quest and didn't get a clear answer. His doubts only grew stronger. Later, he lay with his eyes open, unable to sleep. Sweat ran down his temples. The room was stuffy. The anxiety would not let go. Suddenly, the door burst open and several people rushed in. They shouted that he had been given a mission and ordered them to seize him. He tried to get up, but one of them was already beside him. He looked up and put his hands up in defense. They asked him if he was ready to complete the mission. He responded with a question. Was it really necessary to just kill everyone? There was no answer. One of the attackers hit him, and he fell backward. The armored enemy continued to advance. He shouted and hit him, not giving him time to get up. He rolled to the side and sat on the floor. A boot stopped in front of his face. The man in armor says he wants to talk somewhere quiet. His voice sounds calm, without threats. He gets up and follows him. Later, the meeting takes place in a narrow alley in a medieval city. Stone walls squeeze the space. One of the participants is hidden by a cloak and armor, the other by a gray hood. The conversation continues in the industrial part of the city. A button is pressed on the wrist. The device activates, and a blue energy glow appears around his head. His companion's equipment indicates a high rank. Glasses are adjusted with a familiar movement. The shirt jerks sharply. The fabric rustles. A question is asked about what the conversation was about. The response is one of surprise, as if the words went unheard. The connection remains open. A metal hand touches the face, betraying tension. A sudden movement brings the figures closer together. The hooded man leans in too close. The reaction is instant and sharp. A gesture full of irritation cuts off the conversation. The darkness thickens. The gaze is directed forward, confident and cold. The light reflects in such a way that the eyes remain hidden, heightening the tension of the moment. This came as a surprise to everyone. The knight suddenly leaned forward and extended his hand for a handshake. It was clear from his expression that he felt regret and apologized for his previous behavior. Jane, remaining on guard, nevertheless accepted the handshake. With this gesture, he made it clear that he considered the incident closed for the moment. Without saying another word, Jane turned and walked away. The knight remained standing in place with an unreadable expression on his face. After a while, another figure emerged from the shadows. A woman who, apparently, had been watching the proceedings from the beginning. She said she did not believe Jane was the person they were looking for. The knight nodded silently in agreement. According to him, Jane did not seem to be a top-level player. He added that a real military commander who had been in the game for a long time would never have shown his hand so openly, especially with military surveillance turned on. Having said this, the knight wiped his hand with a handkerchief. His face clearly showed his disgust. The woman, remaining in the shadows, asked if they really needed to keep an eye on a Khemri, considering that the quest with the corrupt count was almost complete. Even if someone found him, what could they do if the main quest was specifically related to finding the egg? The knight disagreed. He said they shouldn't take unnecessary risks. In his opinion, they couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. Hearing this, the woman replied that she was returning to her position. The knight silently watched her leave and said they would meet later. As soon as the woman disappeared into the darkness, Jane, who had been watching everything from the window of a neighboring building, began to understand the truth. He carefully watched their body language and listened to their words. The longer he watched, the clearer the picture became. These people belonged to an organized group that was much more dangerous and secretive than ordinary players. Their coordination and manner of communication, in which they understood each other without unnecessary explanations, was direct proof that these were not random characters. Jane realized that if they were a normal guild of players, they would have at least introduced themselves or tried to negotiate when they mistook him for Higher Mask. But that didn't happen. Their evasive answers and suspicious behavior clearly indicated that they were hiding something. Most likely, they belonged to some kind of underground and very influential association. He knew nothing about their true identities, but he was sure of one thing. These people were far above ordinary players. After a while, Jane found himself far outside the city, in a quiet forest. He sat on a felled stump, alone and lost in thought. Nearby, his summoned skeletons performed the training exercises he had set for them. The undead were busy with their routine, but Jane's thoughts kept returning to what he had seen earlier. He remembered the quest that a Khemri had given him. At first, it had seemed simple and meaningless, as if it had nothing to do with the main storyline. But now his perception had changed. Jane clearly understood that something much bigger was going on, something that the armored knight and the woman in the shadows already knew about. And at that moment, he realized that he had been drawn into a game where the stakes were much higher than they seemed at first glance. They had definitely seen his video, the one where he, hiding under the mask of Hao, fought the corrupted wolf. Most likely, that was how they tracked him down. Jane said this almost in a whisper. His voice was quiet, tinged with irritation and bitterness. But what worried him most was something else. They hadn't tried to confirm his identity or even stop him. That could only mean one thing. They weren't interested in Hao Mask's real identity. Their attention was focused solely on the quest. This thought made him feel increasingly uneasy. He muttered almost inaudibly, wondering if he had been drawn into something whose scale he did not fully understand. An unpleasant, sharp feeling arose in his chest. If he continued on, there would only be more encounters with these mysterious people. It felt as if they were always somewhere nearby, one step behind, patiently waiting for his next move. These thoughts made him even more anxious. For the first time, he felt the urge to stop uploading the video for a while, at least until it became clear what exactly he was dealing with. Right now, extra attention was the last thing he wanted. The thought came to him almost in despair. Why? Every time one problem ended, a new, even crazier one appeared in its place. Meanwhile, far from this forest, in an ultra-modern room, Cillian was stepping out of a high-tech gaming capsule. Secretary Pak Suzy immediately greeted her, handed her a bottle of water, and praised her for her work. Her gaze conveyed sincere admiration. However, Cillian's expression remained cold. She took the bottle without interest, showing no emotion. When Susie asked how the guild entrance exam had gone, the answer was casual. It was all a waste of time. None of the candidates were worthy. Cillian sat down in a chair. Her irritation was immediately apparent. Her fingers tapped restlessly on the armrest. Then her gaze became sharp. She asked a direct question. Was there any news about How Mask? Susie hesitated briefly, then replied that he might have joined another guild. At the moment, no new traces or activity had been detected. Hearing this, Cillian's expression changed instantly. A cold, oppressive tension hung in the room. Susie became visibly nervous and hastily added that she would continue the investigation and provide confirmed information soon. Cillian nodded briefly and without saying a word got up. Passing by Susie, she told her not to come back without accurate data and headed for the door. Already on her way out, she stopped, turned around, and quietly asked what the president had said about this. Susie swallowed nervously. Her voice trembled as she replied that the president had not yet commented on the situation. Cillian stood silently for a moment. Then her eyes narrowed, and when she spoke, her voice took on a cold, almost mocking tone. The president's silence is not approval. He is silent only because VOR is currently showing excellent results. She reminded him that when she first mentioned playing this game, the president had tried to arrange a marriage for her without her consent, as if her future and her worth meant nothing. Now he was silent not out of respect for her choice, but because he saw profit. She understood his game perfectly well. Without further discussion, Cillian gave a new order. By tomorrow morning, she needed a complete list of completely new candidates. Her tone left no room for objection. Negotiations were out of the question. Susie's face paled. Her eyes widened in shock. Her lips trembled as if she were about to protest, but she held back and muttered quietly that Cillian was a truly dangerous person. The pressure of her words always felt the same. In Cillian's world, there were no refusals or delays, only cold, precisely calculated orders. At the same time, Jane and her skeleton warriors reached the lizard swamp. The name Akimri, who was now in Bangsu Castle, came to mind again. It was clear that the quest was close. The task was related to an egg. This meant that the target monster was most likely a bird, reptile, or insect. Assessing his current level and abilities, Jane decided that the swamp would be the safest option at the moment. He summoned one of the skeletons and warned him that the local monsters were unpredictably strong and that he needed to be careful. As preparation, he decided to activate a new skill. As soon as the Helmet of Madness skill was activated, the skeleton's eye sockets flashed red. An aggressive scarlet aura instantly spread around his body. Jane froze, watching this with obvious surprise. He couldn't have imagined that the effect of the skill would be so powerful and frightening to behold. He felt the urge to test the skill's power in practice. Without thinking twice, he ordered the skeleton to attack him. It was risky. Using this skill significantly increased the likelihood that the summoned creature would become uncontrollable and could turn into a threat to its master. But the internal order had been given. Usually skeletons obeyed without question. However, this time things turned out differently. The skeleton's body shook violently. Its movements became jerky and unnatural. It lunged forward and then began to sway as if it had gone mad, which looked truly terrifying. Jane reacted instantly. One powerful blow landed squarely on the skull. The bones scattered, and the head flew to the side and fell to the ground with a dull thud. Jane himself remained standing in place, silently observing the result. He muttered about how the man dared to yell at him. At that moment, the thought occurred to him that something was wrong with the skill. Perhaps it was a flaw in the skill itself, or a glitch in the game system. The expected effect turned out to be different. The skill did not give him control, but instead created a problem. He had a feeling that in the future it could do more harm than good. It was then that a sound came from the misty swamp haze. Figures began to emerge from the thick fog. The first to appear was a lizard man, tall, covered in scales, with sharp claws. He climbed out of the mud, letting out a low, threatening growl. His whole body was tense, ready for battle. His gaze was fixed directly on Jane. Jane calmly looked back at him. It was the right moment to test his summoned creatures in real combat. His hand rose, and he began to fill the other skeletons with magical energy. A red glow shone through their bones, filling them with additional strength and fury. Next, he activated his second skill, bone armor. A strong protective layer of bone formed over their bodies. The preparations were complete. The order to attack was given. The skeletons rushed forward, rushing towards the lizard man. Their movements looked unusual, but they exuded power. Surrounding their enemy, they began to strike. The air was filled with the clang of metal and the dry crack of bones. The lizard man tried to counterattack with his claws, but he didn't have time to recover. The skeletons acted relentlessly, attacking with full force and leaving no chance for defense. Jane kept his eyes fixed on what was happening. This was exactly the test he had been waiting for. a real fight that would allow him to understand how effective his summoned fighters were in real conditions. A few minutes later, 3 lizardmen lay in the mud. Their bodies had been completely destroyed under a barrage of attacks. At that moment, a wave of energy passed through Jane, and a notification of a level increase appeared before his eyes. With the new level came fresh energy. His concentration and determination intensified. He made a decision. He would spend the entire next week in this swamp, exploring it to the end until he found the mysterious egg. If it turned out that this place was not related to the quest, he would immediately move to another region without wasting any time, with the same ruthless attitude that he demanded from his undead warriors. But Jane didn't know that on one of the nearby rocks, someone was watching him closely. A girl sat on a moss-covered boulder, Elijah, known for her beauty and manipulative skills. Wherever she appeared, praise and help found her, creating the illusion of complete control over the situation. However, fate was not kind to her self-confidence. As soon as she shifted slightly to get a better view, her foot slipped, and she fell face first into the dirty swamp water. Mud covered her face and clothes, completely destroying her carefully maintained appearance. As she got up, she was on the verge of irritation. She looked around furiously. The swamp now seemed even more disgusting to her. At the same time, her appearance here was not an accident of her own making. One of her subordinates, who called himself her loyal servant, had brought her here to level up. But immediately after arriving, he died. His own stupidity cost him his life. Now Elijah was alone, in an area filled with hostile monsters whose strength far exceeded her current capabilities. It was at this moment that her gaze fell again on Jane, the one who was completely focused on his fight. He stood out not only for his efficiency, but also for how sparingly he used his energy and strength. The skeletons around him obeyed his orders without question. Jane himself remained completely calm, even when violence was raging around him. This is what caught Ilya's attention. In his coldness and detachment, she saw the perfect target, a player who could be used in her next manipulation. In her mind, he had already become just another pawn. Without hesitation, she headed toward him, limping slowly. She held her leg with one hand, pretending to be seriously injured. Her posture was deliberately weak, her face sad and defenseless. She created the image of a wounded beauty in need of a strong protector. Ilya was sure that no man, especially one like him, could resist her charms. But Jane didn't even look in her direction. Not a word, not a gesture. He just calmly turned around and walked on, as if she didn't exist at all. This cold disregard hurt Ilya more than any rejection. She froze in place, unable to believe what was happening. The realization did not come immediately, but when it did, her expression changed dramatically. Anger boiled inside her. Her lips tightened, and she held back her emotions with an effort of will. How dare he? That question echoed in her head. She had been ignored so easily, as if she were nothing. Meanwhile, Jane continued to do his job. Together with the skeletons, he cleared the swamp of monsters. All his attention was focused on the quest. His encounter with Ilya did not distract him. The danger in the swamp turned out to be greater than expected, but his determination did not waver. Either he would find the egg, or he would make sure that the task was not related to this region. However, Ilya kept up. She followed behind, continuing to pretend to be lame and holding her imaginary wound. But Jane's patience was gradually running out. He knew he was being followed. He wasn't stupid. Now her presence was becoming an irritant. It's just a game, he thought. You have to play it like a game. But Elijah continued to believe that her appearance and presence alone were enough to make anyone help her. Finally, Jane stopped. He turned and looked at her. His eyes narrowed. His tone was harsh and direct. "What do you want?" The question caught Elijah off guard. Her posture instantly softened. In a quiet, weak voice, she began to say that she had dropped her sword while hunting in the swamp. The story was simple but well thought out, pitiful enough to elicit sympathy, but not so much as to appear helpless. She insisted that she couldn't retrieve the weapon herself and needed help. Jane agreed without hesitation. Coldly and unceremoniously, he set a condition. As soon as the sword was found, she would stop following him. There was no softness or kindness in his voice. Elijah hid her dissatisfaction behind a polite smile and restrained gratitude. Inside, she was jubilant. It seemed to her that a crack had appeared in the necromancer's cold wall. The manipulation had worked. After a while, they reached the place where the sword lay. Jane wasted no time and immediately gave orders to the skeletons. They rushed forward through the mud with jerky but confident movements, heading for the weapon. Elijah quietly expressed her gratitude, but her expression changed. Behind her smile lay cold calculation. The necromancer is only dangerous because of his summons, she thought. Separate him from the undead, and he becomes vulnerable. This thought gave her confidence. Suddenly, Elijah attacked Jane, taking advantage of the moment when he seemed distracted. But the blow was too slow and obvious. In one fluid motion, Jane caught her arm, stopped her swing, and effortlessly threw her back into the swamp, back to where they had retrieved the sword. There was a splash. Elijah was completely covered in mud, anger, and humiliation. Her voice trembled with rage. "You're not getting away from here. My elite bodyguards are already on their way. They'll wipe you out." Jane smiled quietly, openly mocking her. With an expression of boredom, he pointed behind her. "Look behind you." Elijah was confused, and when she turned around, several lizard people began to emerge from the thick swamp vegetation. Their eyes glowed with malice, filled with pure hostility. Guttural, vicious cries shook the entire swamp. Elijah screamed and tried to get up, but the slippery ground prevented her from standing. She fell again and again, helplessly floundering in the mud. Jane watches this in an extremely calm mood, as if watching a performance from the sidelines. Almost indifferently, he remarks that if she planned to deceive someone, she should have at least played the part more convincingly. From the very beginning, it was all too obvious. Taking one last look at her, he gives the order to the skeletons. It's time to end this. Too much time has been wasted. But at that moment, something strange happens. The skeletons' movements suddenly become unnatural. One of them begins to behave completely absurdly. His gestures resemble a strange, almost seductive dance, as if he is rehearsing some kind of romantic number. The poses, movements, and bends all look ridiculous. Jane instantly loses his patience. He angrily lashes out at the skeletons and yells at them to stop this circus. He warns them that if anyone repeats such behavior, he will break them himself. A moment later, a system notification flashes before his eyes. Ilya is dead. Additional assist points are awarded. Although he did not kill her personally, the reward was still counted. It seemed strange, but Jane just raised an eyebrow and did not pay much attention to it. The swamp monsters did what he himself was not even going to start. As for her bodyguards, he initially took it as an empty threat. People like that are usually only strong with words. Inside, they are empty. But Jane didn't know that at a distance. A group of well-armed players were watching the whole scene through live recording mode. That's what Elijah was talking about. Her so-called loyal servants, who followed her from different regions. Their faces remained impassive, but their eyes revealed a quiet, cold calculation. After a while, deep in the forest, Jane stood in front of a man who had fallen to his knees. His chest was pierced by a sword. It was none other than one of Elijah's former servants. Even as he was dying, he muttered with hatred that he would kill him for her sake. Irritated and confused, Jane asked aloud how it was possible that any girl was worth killing and dying for. He added that perhaps they thought revenge would win her love. In response, the man burst into maniacal laughter. His eyes revealed a dangerous, painful obsession. He shouted that he loved Elijah. Without wasting a second, Jane delivered the final blow. For a moment, he was overwhelmed with memories. All of Ilya's red flags came flooding back one after another, manipulation after manipulation, as if she were playing the role of an experienced actress. He had never taken her threats about bodyguards seriously, but now it was clear. It was all true. Ilya was perfect at playing the victim, emotionally binding her fans to her. Now, almost every day, another obsessed fan appeared before him. These constant confrontations were wearing him down mentally, and the lack of new quests only added to his irritation. For a moment, the thought flashed through his mind to find Elijah and end this once and for all. But the idea was as tempting as it was dangerous. He understood perfectly well that one such step would turn the entire server against him. After collecting the loot from his defeated enemy, he saw a new message flash on the system interface. Items received: an abandoned combat watch, 5,000 gold coins, rough leather boots, and a rare item, the necklace of promises. After reading the description, Jane remembered that such a necklace could be sold for about 800,000. Excitement gripped both him and his loyal skeletons. For the first time in a long time, he felt that today, he could afford a royal dinner. But at that moment, another fanatic of Elijah noticed him and shouted that he had found her enemy. Seizing the moment, Jane deliberately announced loudly that he was the one who had killed Elijah. He hoped that he was facing only one opponent, and that he would be able to resolve everything with a quick duel. However, after a few seconds, his smile turned to panic. Dozens of heavily armed men began to emerge from behind the trees. There was only one thing in their eyes: murder. Without hesitation, Jane and his skeleton turned around in an instant and ran. The enraged crowd rushed after them, running at full speed and with fury. As he ran, Jane couldn't believe what was happening. How was it even possible for someone to be so obsessed with Elijah? He couldn't imagine that this girl had left behind a whole small army. After putting some distance between them, Jane sent the skeletons back, hoping they could delay their pursuers. However, this faint hope vanished the moment one of the attackers smashed them to pieces with a single blow. At that moment, the harsh reality dawned on him. These weren't just fanatics. He was facing high-level professional players, and there were too many of them. Fighting was no longer an option. There was only one way out: to run. With that thought, Jane rushed deeper into the forest, further and further away from the swamp, thinking only of survival. Only in a remote part did he finally stop. His breathing was ragged, his heart was pounding, his body was exhausted, but his mind remained in a state of full combat readiness. Very quickly, he got the feeling that something was wrong here. This place was nothing like Lizard Swamp. The trees here were much taller and looked ancient. A thick fog hung in the air, and there was an unnatural silence all around. Not a sound from any animals. He knew this region too well, having explored it far and wide for quests and loot, but he had never seen this area before. A look of restrained surprise flashed across his face. It was a hidden area, a secret zone. Meanwhile, Elijah's obsessed fans had also made their way here. They combed through the thick forest, their eyes searching for only one thing: Jane. Soon, one of the pursuers noticed skeletons standing alone in a small clearing. But instead of attacking or running away, the skeletons began to perform a strange, frighteningly absurd dance, as if mocking those who were chasing them. The pursuers stopped, not understanding what was happening. For a few seconds, confusion reigned. Then one of them snapped. Taking what was happening as a blatant insult, he furiously drew his sword and rushed forward. The moment he reached the center of the clearing, the ground beneath his feet suddenly split open. A huge creature burst out of the ground. Before anyone could comprehend what was happening, a massive tongue flew out of the darkness and wrapped around the attacker's body. In an instant, he was dragged into the monster's mouth. It all happened so quickly that the others froze in place. A monster appeared before them, huge, covered in scales, slowly crawling out of the ground. Its presence was so overwhelming that it was difficult to breathe. One of the players trembled as he uttered its name: the Dragon Lizard, a level 40 boss monster, the most dangerous creature in Lizard Swamp. At that moment, Jane, hiding behind a massive tree, silently watched what was happening. He could not have imagined that the hidden area would turn out to be the lair of the Dragon Lizard. It was a legendary monster known for its colossal defense, enormous health pool, and deadly attacks. Usually, it took at least 20 level 40 players to kill it, and even then, victory was hard won. Rumor had it that this boss had been killed long ago and shouldn't have been here, but the game mechanics were different. If a player associated with the corresponding quest entered this area, the boss would respawn. Now there was no doubt. This was exactly where a Henry had sent him. The dangerous quest required killing the Dragon Lizard and obtaining its egg. Even as a low-level player, he was sent on a mission of this scale, which only added to his irritation at a Henry's inflated expectations. However, the current situation gave him a chance. There were living distractions around him, cannon fodder, and perhaps that was what gave him a tiny hope of success. Someone in the group of pursuers, realizing how dangerous this creature was, panicked and suggested retreating. But Jane had already made his decision. He wasn't going to let anyone escape. He quickly activated his enhancement skill, filling his skeletons with extra strength, and ordered them to block the escape routes. Almost immediately, the Dragon Lizard attacked again, instantly destroying one of Elijah's followers. Taking advantage of the chaos, Jane abruptly broke away and rushed toward the nest. He was spotted, and part of the group rushed after him, but that only played into his hands. Taking advantage of the confusion, he flew into the now empty lair. He was sure that the egg must be somewhere there, but when he reached the center, he realized it wasn't there. This annoyed him. He began to carefully examine the space and soon noticed a strange stone. The strange stone did not look like an egg, but there was something about it that caught his attention. At that moment, a system notification popped up. One of his skeleton summons had been destroyed. Jane immediately understood what had happened. The Dragon Lizard had sensed the presence of an intruder and was already returning. There was no time left. Any attempt to continue searching for the egg could end in death. The next moment, the monster was in the lair, but saw no one there. Jane had managed to hide behind a large tree, and most importantly, under such pressure, he could no longer continue his search. So he picked up the stone with the purple symbol and decided to take it to a Henry. Even if it wasn't the egg, it was the only thing he had managed to take. By that time, all the cannon fodder had been destroyed. Bodies lay scattered in the swamp, motionless. Jane slowly approached one player who was not yet completely dead, but was already on the verge of it. His face remained blank, expressionless. Only one thought ran through his head: how unpredictable and strange this world was, filled with people who took risks for big rewards without thinking about the consequences. Without a shred of sympathy, he bent down and took the fallen player's abandoned combat watch. The man tried to say something as if he wanted to resist. Jane drew his sword and thrust it into the ground nearby, his voice cold and harsh. He made it clear that until that moment, he had taken everything lightly, as if it were a normal game. But from now on, that would no longer be the case. Too much was at stake, and if they tried to touch him again, there would be no mercy. It was a warning not only to the dying man, but to the whole group, especially to Elijah, who had set the chain of events in motion. After that, he carefully crossed the swamp, stepping so as not to get stuck in the thick, sticky mud and not to trip over the bodies. As he walked further and further away, he truly understood the consequences for the first time. If these people didn't stop, it would no longer be a series of minor skirmishes. It would escalate into a full-blown war. Immediately after that, without delay, Jane contacted the Bangsu Guild. He reported that he had seen the dragon lizard in Lizard Swamp and offered to sell the exact coordinates for 100,000 gold pieces. He knew that such information was very valuable to high-level guilds. A short time later, he was standing in a Henry's office. In his hands was the very stone with the purple symbol. His movements remained tense and cautious. Inside, he hoped that this was exactly what he needed, because he didn't want to go back and search the entire map again. Henry took the stone and examined it for a long time. It was impossible to read anything on his face. A long, awkward pause hung between them. Finally, Henry nodded slowly and said that yes, this was exactly what he was looking for. Jane felt a great sense of relief. The tension seemed to lift from his shoulders, followed by a wave of excitement. Mary, still holding the stone, looked at him and remarked that he had returned sooner than expected. To be honest, he thought it would take much longer. Jane felt a surge of irritated anger inside, but he held it back. He replied calmly that he had put everything he had into the task, and then, without wasting any time, he demanded the next quest. Henry became more serious and began to explain the truth about the stone. He asked if Jane knew what he had brought. Jane shook his head. Then Henry explained. Wherever there were reports of mutated monsters, this strange object was found again and again nearby. That was why he had given it the working name, Stone of Corruption. Jane listened attentively, and at that moment, he understood why those mysterious people had tried to contact him earlier. They knew about the stone. It was clearly a rare item related to the main quest line, and they didn't want anyone else interfering. At first, Jane thought that Henry's quest was just a tick-box task, something insignificant. But now it was clear. This was not a side quest. It was part of the main storyline, and an extremely important part at that. Henry sincerely apologized. He admitted that the task was too difficult for a single player, but he added that their world was threatened by an unknown and dangerous enemy, and before entrusting someone with such a great responsibility, it was necessary to test their determination and willpower. For the first time, in a truly serious tone, Henry asked if Jane was ready to face the force known by only one word: corruption. Jane felt that this was an opportunity, a truly valuable opportunity. He had already begun to prepare his response, but did not manage to say a word. Henry stopped him with a slight smile. Not yet. The time had not come. He added that Jane had already seen how dangerous the corrupted monsters were. Based on these observations, Henry decided that it was too early to burden an inexperienced player with such a heavy responsibility. Jane froze. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then Henry, with a sly sparkle in his eye, added a condition. If Jane humbly acknowledged him as his master, he might begin to train him. Jane's face tensed with anger, but he understood that in order to remain in the main storyline, he had no choice. Even though it was difficult, he had to agree. Soon, Jane was seen leaving Henry's office. At that moment, a system window popped up. The quest, Egg of the Nest, was complete. A new title was unlocked, Henry's Apprentice, and the second stage of training was about to begin. As he walked away, a wave of irritation rose within him. Henry was less and less like a mentor, and more like a skilled swindler, who, under the guise of a loud title, was simply mocking the players. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a group of players celebrated their victory. They had completed the raid with great difficulty and killed the ferocious dragon lizard. Their faces showed fatigue, but also the joy of victory. The captain gathered everyone and told them to rest and prepare for the next step. Then he approached the armored knight, who had played a key role in the raid. The captain sincerely thanked him and acknowledged that the knight had proven to be much stronger than expected. The knight modestly replied that the team had also worked excellently, which is why everything had gone smoothly. But the captain objected. If they had gone only with the main group without outside help, at least 5 would have died for sure. He admitted that he had not wanted to hire paid players at first, but now he was glad he had made that decision. As a token of his gratitude, he offered the knight an additional reward, more than the agreed amount. The knight refused without hesitation. His voice became even colder, and his face darkened with a shadow. He said that taking more than promised was against his personal code of honor. The captain bowed his head in embarrassment and apologized, admitting that he had assumed the knight's motivation was purely financial. He also noted that the appearance of a famous ranker in such a low-level raid seemed unusual. The knight did not respond. He simply walked forward and declared that he would take all the items promised in the contract from the nest. The captain was surprised and shouted after him that there was nothing of value left in the nest. The knight did not even bother to turn around. His steps were heavy and confident. Inside, he felt a strange satisfaction. He had not expected to get a chance to take the stone of corruption in this way. When he first learned that the dragon lizard had reappeared, he became nervous. He feared that Hao Mask had already progressed through the quest, but the raid began, and the boss was still alive. Then he decided that Hao Mask had failed. Upon entering the nest, the knight was certain Hao Mask had not survived. No single player could defeat such a boss. Now there was only one thing left to do: find the stone of corruption and make sure that Hao Mask would never complete the main storyline. But the longer he searched the nest, the more irritated he became. It was completely empty. No stone of corruption, no valuable items, nothing. He carefully checked every corner. It became clear that someone had been here before him. Overflowing with anger, he cursed loudly. His voice echoed across the battlefield like a rumbling storm. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit room, Jane sat silently. His face remained calm but serious. Quietly, almost in a whisper, he told himself that the moment had finally come. Memories of long, painful days when every morning began with pain and irritation came to mind. Back then, he survived by repeating the same thing to himself. Just a little longer, and everything will be fine. Only this belief and stubbornness allowed him to keep going. Suddenly, a faint smile appeared on his face. He decided that today he deserved a reward. Today he would order meat. He said it out loud, with unexpected joy. A small luxury he had been avoiding for many days. Before that, he had kept his expenses to a minimum, fearing emergencies. But now that the main quest line was in his hands and a new path had opened up, he wanted to allow himself a little pleasure. At that very moment, some unexpected extra money came in. The money he had actually pulled out of Elijah's fan club. The total amount was just over 1,200,000. Adding the balance in his account, the total rose to 1,400,000. Seeing this figure, Jane was truly inspired. For a brief moment, it seemed that all the pain and effort had not been in vain. But the joy did not last long. One after another, system notifications began to arrive on his phone. Unpaid days, overdue utility bills, rent reminders. His excitement instantly turned to disbelief, as if he had been thrown back down to earth. His balance began to rapidly decrease until only 856 rupees remained. He was overcome with anger. Now he couldn't even afford a simple meal. He sat silently when another notification appeared. It was a message from Ramini. She asked if he had stopped making videos. Jane picked up his phone, and his curiosity was suddenly piqued. He realized that he hadn't told anyone about his situation. He had neither the strength nor the time for new videos. And on top of that, some strange and dangerous people had started actively hunting him down. He started typing a reply, trying to explain all this, but stopped. A question popped into his head. Is there any point in being afraid when you're almost starving to death? The pressure, the fear, the expectations, it all seemed pointless. He was tired of playing it safe, tired of living in constant fear. If the world wanted to throw monsters and freaks at him, then he was ready to fight. In a gloomy area with crooked graves and a strange silence, Jane reappeared. He walked confidently and steadily alongside the summoned skeletons. A cold, impassive system window opened before his eyes, confirming that he had entered the forest of the dead. He hadn't been here in a very long time, although in his early days, he often came to this forest. It was connected with memories of his past life, and yet, despite his familiarity with it, the place still remained eerie and disturbing. There was something in the air that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Jane realized that this was probably the best place to gain experience. In addition, the gloomy atmosphere was ideal for video and could attract viewers. Turning to his recruits, he began to give instructions. Today's hunt would take place here. Then he introduced a new member of the group, a skeleton mage. Jane explained that magic would now be actively used in the strategy and ordered the others to work in full coordination with the mage. This ability to summon an additional skeleton came to him from a Hemri, the very same mentor con artist who had taken him on as a student. From the day Jane became his student, he had acquired this skill as well. As his skill grew, the skeleton mage also developed, gaining access to more advanced and powerful spells necessary for survival and victory. However, tension remained inside. Mana was already at a dangerously low level. 3 skeletons were active, and adding a mage meant a sharp increase in consumption. Now there was no room for error or protracted battles. After a brief preparation, Jane gave the order to begin the hunt. As soon as his voice sounded, a bony hand appeared from under the ground. It was a clear signal. His presence had already been sensed underground. Soon, level 33 skeletal monsters began to rise from the ground. Their bodies were covered with a faint red glow, and their eyes reflected a wild, cruel madness. For Jane, these were ordinary monsters. but his summoned skeletons saw them as just as lifeless as themselves, and were unwilling to recognize them as enemies. When the skeletons refused to move forward, Jane asked irritably what they were doing and ordered them to attack without hesitation. They may not have had full minds, but they did have instincts. They internally rejected killing others like themselves. There was a strange sadness and hesitation in their movements. Meanwhile, the skeleton monsters began to approach, swaying. Jane tried to explain that the nature of undead monsters was different from that of ordinary creatures, and that as soon as the battle began, his summoned creatures would understand everything themselves. But when he turned around, he saw that the skeletons were hiding, trembling, as if the very word battle instilled fear in them. This finally drove him mad. He snapped his fingers and repeated his order harshly. No excuses. Attack. There was no other choice. One of the skeletons mustered up his courage and stepped forward first. The other three lined up behind him, following his example. He gripped his sword tightly and struck a vertical blow with all his might. Something like tears flashed in his eyes. Not real tears, but ones that reflected a deep inner conflict. The blade cut into the monster's bony body. There was a crunch, and it collapsed. But his doubts vanished the moment another monster, surrounded by a deadly aura, rushed into the attack. He walked without fear. Jane's skeleton instinctively retreated, clearly frightened. And then Jane's voice rang out. He said that ordinary attacks were useless here, and that victory could only be achieved through strategy. Without wasting a second, he stepped forward and took out his rare class weapon, the mage's hammer. An almost insane smile appeared on his face. He put all his strength into the blow and split the skeleton monster's skull on the first try. The crash echoed through the forest. Fear and hesitation disappeared. A torrent of power crashed down on the enemy's head with such force that the skull was torn from the spine and disappeared into the mist of the gloomy forest. The remaining body crumbled and turned to dust. Jane smiled with satisfaction. Everything happened exactly as he had expected. He turned to his chosen ones and began to explain. Such monsters must be defeated by striking them directly on the head. However, instead of understanding, the skeletons grabbed their own skulls, as if afraid that the same thing would be done to them. Jane smirked, but quickly regained his serious expression. He announced the goal: to destroy 100 skeleton monsters in 100 minutes. His voice was cold and dangerous. Then he calmly added a warning. If they failed, he would simply leave them there. That was enough. All 4 summoned skeletons rushed forward without a word, beginning to hunt their own kind. No loyalty, no emotions, only fear for their own existence. The battle unfolded rapidly. A heavy, sad atmosphere still hung in the air. Now, each skeleton warrior wielded a heavy hammer and crushed the skulls of their enemies with frightening accuracy. Watching this, Jane thought he was wrong. He had expected them to have difficulty wielding the hammers, but they were doing just fine. A new wave of hope flared in his chest. This video was sure to be popular. He was about to contact Romini when a deep vibration shook the forest. The ground shook, and heavy footsteps began to approach. Jane instantly called the skeletons to him. A level 35 skeleton warrior appeared before him, much larger and more dangerous than any he had seen before. An intense red chaotic aura pulsed in its eyes, and its gaze was fixed directly on Jane. Jane himself remained calm and collected. He immediately understood that this was no ordinary monster, but a rare elite opponent that appeared either by chance or after the destruction of a certain number of skeletons. But in his mind, this creature did not represent danger, but rather a new dish for dinner. He even had time to think about whether it would be better to fry it or make a nice steak. Saliva rose to his throat completely involuntarily. At that moment, the elite skeleton warrior raised a huge axe and brought it down with full force. The blow sent powerful shockwaves in all directions, but Jane managed to take a step back at the very last moment and miraculously avoided the attack. It was then that he truly realized for the first time that this battle could be deadly. A cold thought flashed through his mind. If he had been even a moment too late, this place would have become his grave. Before dodging, Jane managed to strike the skeleton warrior's bone, hoping to weaken the force of the next blow at least a little. But the monster didn't even hesitate. It instantly switched hands and brought the axe down again with the same destructive power. Jane had neither time to think nor opportunity to catch his breath. However, he had no intention of retreating. Clutching his hammer, he lunged forward. Behind him, the 3 summoned skeletons moved in perfect rhythm, as if they were one. Each blow was precise, measured, and without haste. Time after time, Jane struck the pelvic bone of the skeletal warrior, destroying its stability. The speed and precision of his movements clearly showed that they were not facing just any player, but someone who had been a top-ranked player in his previous life. The battle was intense, but a confident smile never left Jane's face. After a series of swift attacks, he smoothly moved behind the monster. His skeletons instantly took up positions nearby. Jane mechanically counted his allies. Everyone was in place. No one had fallen. No one was injured. Perfect. But the skeleton warrior rose again and rushed into the attack with even greater fury. Jane, without looking away, calmly noted that the elite monster's attacks had become too predictable. He didn't even move a step and, on the contrary, allowed himself a smirk, mockingly remarking that the monster was too impatient and completely unable to maintain tension. At that moment, the spell of the summoned skeleton mage was completed. Where fear had once been visible, now there was a cold, fierce determination. The mage raised his hand, and a fireball began to grow rapidly in his palm. In the next second, he struck his target with precision. A pillar of flame erupted, completely engulfing the skeleton warrior. The entire battlefield was flooded with blinding light for a moment. Jane exhaled. One after another, messages appeared on the system screen. The elite skeleton warrior had been defeated, and the group had gained experience. The remains of the bones slowly crumbled into dust, but a faint echo of the aura lingered in the air for a while. With a smile, Jane noted to himself that this moment would easily bring in at least 10,000 views. His thoughts returned to food. Now there would definitely be grilled meat. But at that moment, a sharp signal sounded from the system. A warning appeared that a field boss had been detected. Jane's heart sank for a second. He realized with irritation that he had completely forgotten about the trigger condition. The countdown to the boss's appearance had already begun, and he was completely unprepared for it. Thoughts raced through his mind at breakneck speed. Fight or retreat. The next signal left no doubt. The field boss had detected the intruders and was beginning to awaken. The conditions had been met. The earth shook, and a huge golden summoning circle appeared on the surface. Its glow was frightening, like a harbinger of impending destruction. Jane didn't even have time to think about his dinner before a new threat began to rise from the circle. A jointed skeleton slowly emerged from the ground, its 3 arms crossed. Its entire body was surrounded by a golden aura, both divine and frightening. A glowing halo appeared behind it, and the entire forest glade was flooded with cold, sacred light. Jane stood motionless, gripping his hammer tightly. The skeletons he had summoned lined up around him, ready for battle. His gaze conveyed calm, quiet confidence. He believed he could win. But the truth was much darker. The monster before him was no ordinary enemy. It was a golden skeleton, a boss-level creature that had come to avenge the thoughtless slaughter of hundreds of skeleton monsters in the Forest of the Dead. A bright golden light burned in its empty eye sockets, clearly indicating its status as a field boss. Jane remembered. In his previous life, this creature first appeared as a boss for magic classes. In the early stages of the game, it was known by one name, the Killer of Newbies. He understood perfectly well that the condition for summoning it was the mass destruction of skeletons, and the death of an elite warrior was the final spark. Jane knew how difficult this battle would be at his current level, but he also knew something else. If he won, this video would be a real jackpot for the channel. The plan was already in place. All that remained was to execute it. The skeleton summons had been fully powered up, and with coordinated teamwork, victory really did seem possible. But the moment Jane turned to give the order to his army, his heart sank. There wasn't a single skeleton in sight. At that very second, a notification popped up on the interface. All summonses cancelled. The reason? Complete mana depletion. The realization hit him all at once. His irritation skyrocketed. Not only had he activated the strongest boss at the worst possible moment, but he had also completely overlooked his mana consumption. In the previous protracted battle, he had kept 4 skeletons summoned, and then the skeleton mage used a heavy fire spell, completely depleting his reserves. Jane took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. Now there was no choice. He would have to fight this battle alone. His only regret was that his skeletal allies would not be able to take part in this epic battle. Slowly straightening up, he activated his combat watch, a unique device perfectly tailored to his fighting style. He gathered his thoughts. The real war was about to begin. As soon as the command was given, the slot on the combat watch flashed, and Jane's custom combat armor began to form around him. Discharges of raw power ran through the armor, crackling like lightning. His body was filled with unlimited energy. His combat power peaked. Until this moment, he had fought more like a mage, amplifying his spells. Now it was time for close combat. This was his true form. Without the slightest hesitation, Jane rushed straight at the golden skeleton. In response, the skeleton activated its golden halo with a single thought. A dull rumble echoed through the forest, the signal for the start of a deadly clash. The golden skeleton opened its mouth wide. Something resembling an ancient spell sounded, heavy and ominous. In the next moment, golden rays roared toward Jane. He kept moving forward. His speed and agility were at their limit. One after another, he dodged the rays, each of which crashed into the ground behind him, destroying everything in its path. A thought flashed through his mind. If just one hit him, it would be all over. And the boss was firing several at once. Now it was clear why they called him the Rookie Killer. But Jane already had a plan. He jumped up sharply, clenching his hammer, and came down from above. The blow was devastating. The golden skeleton's pair of hands shattered with a crack. This was his key weakness. His hands, which were directly linked to his ability to cast spells. Having lost them, the boss instantly weakened. One of the magic circles in the air scattered, leaving only 2. Jane understood perfectly well. Each circle was tied to the hands. The strategy remained simple and harsh. Break all the hands, depriving the enemy of his power. But suddenly the golden skeleton behaved strangely. Jane frowned. A notification flashed. The boss has focused its attention on you. Then another. The boss has figured out your tactics. And immediately after that, the boss is analyzing your skill level. Jane was stunned. The golden skeleton slowly twisted its remaining arms in a complex pattern. When the movement was complete, a chaotic purple aura was woven into its golden glow. Now the creature looked like something between a deity and a demon. Distorted, disturbing, like the embodiment of a holy monster. Jane cursed under his breath. His strategy had stopped working. Without warning, a purple beam shot toward him. The spot where he had been standing a moment ago was completely destroyed. Only his honed reflexes saved him. Jane jumped back sharply and ran without looking back. The beam kept up. Each explosion was just a step behind. Each detonation brought death closer. In a desperate leap, Jane jumped and crashed into an old ruined stone with a dull thud. He froze for a few seconds, breathing heavily. His body was at its limit, but his gaze remained fixed on the golden skeleton. How does he do it? Thoughts raced through his mind. In his past life, Jane had studied this boss thoroughly. Every movement, every spell. He knew the right way to win. Destroy all the arms, then deliver the final blow. But what was happening now was completely beyond his knowledge. Nothing that was happening matched any of his stored memories. Jane feverishly pondered. Either his memory had failed him, or this boss had hidden patterns, or some update or patch had changed its behavior, as had happened before with one of the training quests. He smiled quietly. Either way, he had zero information. Perhaps it was the effect of a Henry's student status, or maybe something else. He cursed quietly. "You've gone into cheat mode," he muttered. Despite his irritation, he had no intention of giving up. When another bolt of lightning shot toward him, his body reacted on its own. His movements became almost unnatural. He slipped past the attack and quietly told himself that he would continue to fight to the end. One after another, chaotic purple beams cut through the air, accompanied by flashes of lightning. All attacks were directed at only one person, Jane. He continued to dodge. Each movement was quick and precise. So far, not a single attack had even grazed him. He had learned to read the trajectories of the golden skeleton's spells. But the real problem was something else. Constant dodging was burning up his physical endurance. His strength was reaching its limit, and there was still no opportunity to counterattack. Jumping to the side and trying to come up with a new strategy on the fly, he failed to notice the most important thing. The golden skeleton's huge hand was already reaching for him. The realization came too late. There was no support around him, no way to change his trajectory. A giant hand closed around him. The movement was slow, but so smooth and precise that it was impossible to recognize it in advance. Gina was lifted into the air. He found himself squeezed in the monster's grip. Pure, concentrated hatred emanated from the golden skeleton. Fury burned in its empty eye sockets, as if all the malice in the world was directed solely at him. A roar rolled through the forest, echoing off the trees. The creature was confident that this little man would not escape. Jane grunted wearily. "What a crazy design this game has," he muttered. A belated realization came to mind. Grabbing with the hand was also part of the pattern. He had simply missed that moment. Now the danger was absolute. Another magic circle formed in front of his face. Inside, a destructive golden beam was already forming, capable of incinerating him alive. But instead of panicking, Jane smiled, calmly, confidently, because now he knew. The moment for a counterattack had finally come. He activated one of his most powerful abilities, demonic shackles. Due to the previous blow, the distance between them was minimal, perfect for the skill to work. The boss's parameters instantly dropped by almost a fifth. At that moment, Jane broke free from the grip. Without wasting a second, he jumped straight at the golden skeleton's head. In midair, he pulled his arm back, gathering all his remaining strength for one decisive blow. Now everything was at stake. There was only one focus left in his gaze, the final blow. His fist began to glow, filling with fighting energy. A brief thought of gratitude for such a perfect opportunity flashed inside him. And then the blow struck the boss's head. A blue trail of light stretched behind his fist, like an arrow falling to zero. In the next moment, there was a deafening explosion. The entire clearing shook from the shockwave. The golden and chaotic energy disappeared without a trace. All that remained was Jane's blue glow, spreading through the air. The light of the golden skeleton dimmed. His bones began to crack with a nasty grinding sound and in a matter of moments crumbled into fine sand. Jane, laughing as if addressing an invisible audience, declared victory over the boss. When he landed, another huge golden magic circle appeared, sucking in the remains of the bones. Almost immediately, the interface exploded with notifications. The victory was confirmed. A veritable shower of rewards began. Experience poured in so fast that his level rose instantly. Gold, bonuses, and the prestigious title of Skeleton Destroyer were locked into the system. When everything finally settled down, Jane laughed awkwardly. What a roller coaster ride that was. Along the way, Jane realized something else that was really serious. If he continued to distribute his stats in the same way, he would run into big problems. As a necromancer, he invested the minimum amount of mana, relying on titles and equipment to get everything else. It had worked for a while, but now the system was starting to fail. It was becoming impossible to hold several skeletons at once for long. In addition, he had already acquired new skills that also required mana. He had been pumping up his strength so that the skeletons could fight alongside him. But if the summons didn't hold, all that strength would turn into useless ballast. Irritation overwhelmed him again. He had already taken all the mana-oriented titles available at his current level. Good equipment could solve some of the problems, but he was desperately short of money. After thinking for a moment, he exhaled and decided not to dwell on it. Let everything go as it goes for now. We'll see what happens next. Right now, the main thing was to send Romani the full video of the raid in the Forest of the Dead, and then get to level 40 as quickly as possible to continue Ahemri's quests. The thought of roasted meat unexpectedly lifted his spirits, and a faint smile flashed across his face. Meanwhile, Romani had already finished editing. Sitting in her room, she watched the video again and beat a stuffed toy with excitement. She was overwhelmed with emotion. Jane had single-handedly defeated a boss that was significantly higher than his level, without a single hit, without preparation, without a pre-planned strategy. The raw footage was so powerful that it required almost no editing. All that remained was to come up with a title, and after a moment's thought, a name was chosen that perfectly captured the essence of what was happening: the Emperor of Solo Gaming. After completing the hunt, Jane returned to the Bansu Castle Raiders Association branch. Without wasting any time, he went straight to Ahemri, marking the completion of another stage and reaching level 40. This time, his mentor looked different. There was interest in his eyes. But after assessing Jane's condition, his dirty clothes, disheveled hair, and obvious fatigue, he merely noted his appearance dryly. Jane didn't pay any attention to this, focusing solely on the reward. Ahemri summoned the skill book, and at that moment, the system confirmed the completion of the next stage of the quest. It was osteology, an ultra-rare passive necromancer skill. Finding something like this on the market was practically impossible. The skill significantly reduced mana consumption when summoning skeletons, which was exactly what Jane needed most right now. Without wasting a second, he activated the book. However, the rewards did not end there. Next, Ahemri took out a ring made from the very same distorted stone that Jane had brought earlier. The artifact was linked to the power of the Twisted One, and, when combined with the corresponding necklace, provided powerful bonuses to stats. Jane immediately recognized this item. In his previous life, such a reward was only given to the first player to complete the main quest chain. His heart leapt with joy, but at the last moment, the ring was taken away. Without explanation, Ahemri turned and left, leaving Jane perplexed. However, after a few moments, the mentor returned, now with a look of open mockery in his eyes, offering to give him the reward on one condition. Using his combat watch, Jane immediately sprang into action. Ahemri moved easily and clearly enjoyed what was happening, while Jane chased after him, struggling to contain his irritation. If he weren't facing a non-player, it would have ended much faster. In the end, the ring ended up in Jane's possession. Out of breath but satisfied, he finally calmed down. The most important thing was that the next task had already been decided. Contact with an agent named Miggy had been lost, and now Jane's path lay towards Soryu Castle. He would have to go there to check it out. A slight irritation flared up inside Jane, but he quickly suppressed it. Now was not the time to waste energy on emotions. Instead, he focused on the next step. He understood perfectly well that the territory of Soryu Castle was filled with high-level monsters, and going there without additional training would be pure suicide. At that moment, an urgent notification appeared on his combat watch. The message was from Romani. She said that the video of his solo raid against the Golden Skeleton had already been uploaded to the platform, and that he should check out the results as soon as possible. When Jane opened the video, he literally froze. The clip had already gone viral. It had tens of thousands of views. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, and the flood of donations was like a hurricane. Seeing huge sums of money coming into his account, he was so shocked that it felt like he had been hit by a truck at full speed. His legs buckled, and he sank to the ground, unable to take his eyes off the screen. For a long time, Jane just sat there, staring at the balance figures, checking them over and over again, as if afraid that it would all disappear in the next moment. When the realization of what was happening finally sank in, images of the food he had denied himself for years began to flood his mind. Steaks, fish, expensive meat dishes, all of this flashed before his eyes, causing an almost physical feeling of hunger. A lively spark appeared in his eyes. He had expected a good response to the video, but what was happening far exceeded any expectations. Overwhelmed by this sudden success, he was about to log out and finally allow himself some rest when a new notification appeared. It was a large donation with an attached message. The sender turned out to be the scouting manager of the Thunder Hunters Guild. The name alone was enough to bring long-forgotten scenes from his past life back to Jane's memory. This guild had tried to lure him away many times before, pursuing him everywhere and sending invitations, even direct contacts from the leader himself. Without a moment's hesitation, he declined the invitation. At the same time, old, unpleasant memories rose from the depths of his memory. Betrayal, ridicule, envious glances from former comrades. The very people he trusted completely ended up bowing down to fame and money without hesitation. He remembered how he had always refused to change guilds for profit, believing that true strength and recognition would come on their own if he followed the honest path. He wanted to grow with his team, but over time, the gap in levels became too noticeable. Some chose the short path, and loyalty turned out to be one-sided. The realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. Jane shook his head sharply, chasing away the memories, and pulled himself together. Now was not the time to dwell on the past. He stood up, and a firm determination reappeared in his gaze. Ahead of him lay new goals, new dangers, and a path he was determined to follow to the end, on his own terms. He realized that the best way to deal with his sudden success was to invest it in his own empowerment. With this thought, Jane summoned his skeleton squad. Blue flames shot up, and one by one, undead warriors materialized before him. The first skeleton's eyes burned with a sharp, almost human excitement, while the others took threatening battle stances, fully prepared for combat. From the outside, it looked as if they were about to challenge the golden skeleton again. However, Jane quickly dampened their enthusiasm. He had already dealt with that enemy alone, and there were no plans for a repeat performance. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed the squad, causing a wave of discontented murmurs. Some skeletons even allowed themselves to make vague sounds of irritation, more like grumbling. Jane ignored this and moved on to new instructions. From that moment on, rigorous training began. Movements had to be perfected, and previous mistakes were not to be repeated. His expression betrayed slight irritation, but his voice was firm and confident. This moment unexpectedly reminded him of his old team from his past life, when similar demands caused complaints, fatigue, and requests for a break. Back then, not everyone was ready to go all the way. Now everything was different. The skeletons stood silently. No one objected. No one backed down. They all raised their hands simultaneously in agreement. A faint smile appeared on Jane's face. The difference between the past and the present was obvious. This team would not betray or falter. Without wasting any time, he gave the order to begin the hunt. At that moment, he remembered how it all began, with one weak, clumsy skeleton, barely able to stand on its feet. Now, 3 skeleton warriors and 1 mage were moving alongside him, coordinated, confident, like a real army. Jane suddenly stopped and turned to the squad. Their next target was Sorio Castle, and they had some extra training to squeeze in along the way. The skeletons nodded in unison, although their empty eye sockets showed that they did not understand the true meaning of these words. Then Jane took a heavy club from his inventory and lazily swung it in the air. The essence of the training was extremely simple. No tactics and no fighting, just running. At the same time, any lagging behind promised a painful reminder of the mistake made. Without waiting for a response, he himself rushed forward, right behind his subordinates. The skeletons panicked. Their low intelligence played a cruel joke on them. Fear instantly forced them to run at full speed, as if they were being chased by a mad trainer. Thus, in complete chaos, the whole group rushed towards Sorio Castle, resembling an absurd mixture of comedy and horror. In another corner of the game world, Ciri sat motionless, staring into space. Her gaze was cold and detached, as if she were deep in her own thoughts. One of the guild members, Hatch, appeared nearby, but there was no response. Ciri had just completed an extremely dangerous hunt, during which she was pursued by numerous dragon scavengers, and now she stood above their bodies like a queen of carrion. Hutch reminded her of the upcoming meeting. Ciri slowly descended from her perch, and inquired about the status of the questline related to the distorted count. The answer was disappointing. There had been no progress. All leads had reached a dead end. A shadow of irritation flashed across Ciri's face. The thought that the Hydra Guild might have pulled ahead in the main storyline seemed humiliating to her. Hutch tried to smooth things over by mentioning the upcoming meeting of 30 guilds, where new information might come to light. However, Ciri dismissed the idea, considering such gatherings of self-assured elites to be useless. Despite the half-joking remark about her coldness, she just smiled calmly. If even she couldn't find a way forward with the main quest, then it was unlikely that the others had made any progress either. Meanwhile, Jane's video was rapidly gaining popularity. Overnight, he earned huge sums of money, teetering on the brink of losing his composure. However, the memory of the man who had put him through so many trials rekindled his thirst for revenge. He decided to live like a hungry beast, stopping at nothing. First, he went to the moneylender from whom he had once borrowed money. There, without hesitation, he threw a bag on the table, paying off the entire debt with interest in cash. The moneylender's reaction was one of genuine astonishment. The next step was to buy rare skill books, which brought Jane sincere satisfaction. However, when he returned to the game, he found that his account was empty again. Surrounded by calls, Jane felt a pang of disappointment. He considered himself ready, but the sight of the empty balance still hurt. However, he did not dwell on it for long. He decided to put his regrets aside and focus on learning new skills without wasting any time. He didn't delay and immediately learned new skills. The system notified him that he had acquired the skill of leather crafting, a passive skill of the E rank that increases defense by attaching monster remains to leather. It was noted that if serious damage occurred, the material would have to be replaced. Jane decided to test it out right away. The system suggested using the horns of a skeletal warrior to strengthen his own body. He agreed, after which he received the essence of the skeletal warrior and a 5-point increase in defense. Out of curiosity, he took a sword and struck himself, carefully monitoring the result. The effect was stable and even exceeded expectations, which made him clearly satisfied. Next, he studied the curse of laziness. This skill allowed him to slow down his target, but the faster and stronger the enemy, the more mana was required, and the shorter the duration of the effect. Jane found this very promising. He glanced at the nearby summons and tested the skill on one of them. The skeleton instantly froze, as if turned to stone, confirming the combat value of the ability. The last book was the most coveted one. The system notified him that he had acquired the skill to summon a golem. Jane immediately realized that this was the most difficult and most important skill of all those he had learned. He activated it without delay, and even his own summons looked stunned. A massive golem appeared before him, and Jane felt genuine satisfaction at finally being able to summon such a creature. The golem's size immediately made it clear that it was more reliable than any tank in the area. Jane activated passive copy mode and established a connection between himself and the summon, knowing that this mode allowed him to synchronize his movements. The combination of his own technique and the golem's strength seemed incredibly effective. However, the first test yielded an unexpected result. After a sharp blow in the air, the golem remained motionless, causing complete bewilderment among the other summons and strong irritation in Jane himself. The thought of a possible system error flashed through his mind. But a moment later, the golem repeated the previous movement with a slight delay, causing everyone present to freeze. It became clear that its reaction was different from the other commands and worked on a different principle. Outwardly, Jane smiled, thinking about the next step, but inside he felt conflicting emotions. On the one hand, the potential was obvious. On the other hand, he was tormented by doubts as to whether he could really become the strongest player with such a skill set. At the same time, a meeting was beginning elsewhere. Guild leader Eris thanked everyone present for taking the time to come despite their busy schedules. The head of the Red Bulls Guild responded with slight irony, noting the familiar faces. The leader of the Big Smile just sighed deeply, while the leader of the Thunder Hunters remained coldly silent. It was noted that 29 guilds had received invitations, but only 4 had shown up. This provoked a restrained reaction. After all, we were talking about the top 30 strongest guilds. It was clarified that the meeting had been organized suddenly, and that such gatherings between top guilds were extremely rare due to constant competition. Then came a serious revelation. The Hydra Guild had identified the distorted count and was planning a final raid in about a month. This news caused noticeable tension. It became clear that if Hydra completed the task first, it would gain exclusive access to future main quests, sponsorship contracts, and content. Emotions ran high in the hall, but the conflict was successfully diffused. It was emphasized that internal clashes would only play into Hydra's hands. As a result, the idea of an anti-Hydra alliance was put forward, within which the guilds present pledged to temporarily cease conflicts between themselves and share all information on the task of the Twisted Count. There were no objections, although it was clear that not everyone was happy with this agreement. After the meeting ended, the tension remained. The leader of the Thunder Hunters left the meeting with obvious internal dissatisfaction. Later, outside of the game, she reflected on what had happened. The situation seemed humiliating. Even the first boss of the chapter had not been defeated alone, and now she had to join forces with others. This went against her principles, but she understood perfectly well that reality dictated its own terms.